The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. We're reading today from Jesse Eisinger's new book, shall we call it The Chicken Poop Club? Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. This is from the introduction. It's from page 15 in the introduction. Boom, bust, and crackdown. America's economic history is unfolded in a series of booms, followed by busts, followed crucially by crackdowns. After the stock market crash of 1929, congressional hearings channeled public outrage and resulted in landmark laws regulating Wall Street and creating the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934. A few years later, a new SEC helped put the head of the mighty New York Stock Exchange in prison. Though inconsistent, the SEC over the intervening decades emerged as one of the most respected government regulatory bodies. The SEC is the most important corporate regulator, overseeing publicly traded companies in the nation's capital markets, money markets. The agency has civil powers, must team up with the various offices of the Justice Department when a securities laws violation turns into a criminal investigation. After the go-go years of the late 1960s, the SEC worked closely with the Southern District to take on top law firms, top accounting firms, and top executives who had helped perpetrate corporate frauds. After the savings and loan scandals of the 1980s, when hundreds of small banks across the country failed due to reckless real estate loans, the Department of Justice prosecuted over 1,000 people, including top executives of many of the largest failed banks. After the Michael Milken-run junk bomb boom and blow-up of the late 1980s, prosecutors spent years digging up evidence of stock manipulation and insider trading at major investment banks and law firms, prosecuting some of the most powerful Wall Street figures of the era. In the early 2000s, the NASDAQ bubble burst. The NASDAQ bubble revealed a corporate book-cooking pandemic. Top officers from giants such as Enron, WorldCom, Quest Communications, Adelphia, and Tyco International ended up in prison. Recklessness and stupidity fuel booms, but usually so do crimes. By contrast, after the 2008 financial crisis, the government failed. In response to the worst calamity to hit capital markets and the global economy since the Great Depression, the government did not charge any top bankers. The public was furious. Bank bailouts and a lack of consequences for banksters radicalized both ends of the political spectrum and gave rise to two of the most potent social movements of our time, Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Anger about the lack of Wall Street accountability seeded disenchantment with Obama. The 2016 insurgency of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who challenged frontrunner Hillary Clinton almost to the doors of the Democratic Convention, demonstrated the anger that remained on the left years after the apex of the crisis, undergirding mistrust about Clinton. She had given friendly, fateful, and highly compensated speeches to investment banks. While a Republican president had presided over the crisis and a Democratic one had saved the financial system, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and the Democrats could not claim to be the protectors of the working class and the scourges of investment bankers. That was due in large measure to the lack of corporate prosecutions. According to the Wall Street Journal, analysis of 156 criminal and civil cases brought by the Justice Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission against 10 of the largest banks on Wall Street since 2009, in 81% of the cases, the government neither charged nor even identified individual employees. In the remainder, the government only charged 47 low and mid-level employees. Merely one was a boardroom-level executive whom the SEC charged civilly rather than criminally. In his own incoherent and superficial ways, Donald Trump rode anger about Wall Street throughout his campaign, railing at the bank's power. He closed his campaign by hinting poisonously about a cabal of global bankers rigging the system. He assailed politicians who were owned by Goldman Sachs, Trump's word. His first Ted Cruz in the primary and then Hillary Clinton in the general. The Republican platform called for breaking up the big banks by returning to the Glass-Steagall Act, the Depression-era law that splits commercial bank from investment banking, a reflection of resentment about the government bailout of the financial system as the bankers wriggled free. No sooner had Trump taken office, though, than he rushed to stuff members of that cabal into his White House and cabinet. He and Goldman alumni who advised him moved within days of taking office to unravel Dodd-Frank and loosen restrictions on corporations generally. It's commonplace to observe that no top bankers from the top financial firms went to prison for the widespread malfeasance that led to the 2008 financial crisis. It's such a socially acceptable opinion that no less than an inside-the-beltway figure than the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, said after he was safely out of office that more bankers should have gone to prison. The problem is worse than that. Today's Justice Department has lost the will and indeed the ability to go after the highest level corporate wrongdoers. The problem did not begin in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, and it has not ended. Prosecutors don't simply struggle to put executives for too big to fail banks in prison. They also cannot hold accountable wrongdoing executives from a gamut of large corporations, from pharmaceutical to technology to large industrial operations to retail giants. And, the book goes on from there, laying out exactly who and how and why. It's extraordinary. The Chicken Beep Club.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you on this beautiful Monday here in Portland, Oregon. It is just an amazing time to be alive. Paul Krugman's lies. I don't know if you saw this in the New York Times. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But I wanted to start out with a riff on a piece that I published on Alternet over the weekend. It went up, 6-8 hours ago at alternet.org. And it's titled, "The America I Knew is Pretty Much Gone." Actually, that's not the exact title. Let me pull it up. And "The America I Knew has almost disappeared." There we go. And what's left of our democratic institutions are under siege. And it's not just our democratic institutions; it's our country. For example, and this is just by way of, my example for the day, right? But we all have them, right? In every field, in every industry, it's like, we're not being dealt with as American citizens and as American consumers the way historically we have been. For example, the modern moving industry was really, literally created in the 1800s, in the early 1800s, when they had the Calistoga cars, the Calistoga, well, actually there's a word for them. And hang on just a second, I'll get it for you. And Conestoga wagons is what they were called. This is around 1800. This is when Americans started moving west. And then the railroads happened. And in 1927, Arrow Mayflower Transit Company, which is today known as Mayflower, became the first company to be awarded a license for moving people by the Interstate Commerce Commission. And the way that this all happened was, in 1935, Congress passed what was called the Motor Carrier Act to promote, quote, fair competition. In 48, the Reed-Bullwinkle Act was passed by Congress. And basically what these laws did is they said that if you're a moving company, you can't rip off your customers. Well, in 1980, they passed a new Motor Carrier Act that deregulated the trucking industry, the moving industry. And so, deregulated by Congress. Now, Jimmy Carter was president. But there was this whole deregulation craze. And so now we're in a situation where, for example, on September 2nd, now today is October 16th. So September 2nd was a month and a half ago. A moving company picked up both Louise and I's, all of our personal stuff, but also much of our office stuff, including the set for this show, which is a month and a half ago, and guaranteeing us delivery here in Portland between 9 and 21 days. So Louise flew out here and waited 2 weeks. Nothing happened. She came back to D.C. The company stopped taking our phone calls, stopped replying to our emails. She drove our car out here to Portland. Took 4 days to go across the country with a dog and 2 cats to meet the moving van, and waited here another week. We still haven't heard from them. We have no idea where our stuff is. We have no idea even if our stuff is. And I'm talking about, like a lifetime of baby pictures and everything else. It's just like, imagine, this is, and I'm not complaining about this specifically. I might in another show, because I'm looking at these people in California who literally lost everything, and what they're going through is so much worse than just being a month and a half without your stuff and sleeping on air mattresses and basically not knowing where your stuff is. But I'm assuming it's coming, and I'm assuming that when it finally comes here, there's going to be some sort of ransom-taking behavior on the part of the movers, because this company, if you look at their Yelp comments, seems to have that as a history. But it's just, prior to 1980, that would have been illegal. If a moving company contracted to do something, they actually had to do it. They were actually regulated. There were regulators, and there was, and now not so much. So I'm looking at not just, our example of just being screwed by a moving company or whatever. I'm not sure that we've been screwed yet. 40 days without your stuff, 45 days, whatever it is, month and a half. But we see this all across the country. We see this in every industry. You see how the airlines are treating their customers these days. You see how banks are treating their customers these days, where people are routinely getting ripped off on their credit cards. They're routinely getting ripped off. Rip-off is like the major business model in American business right now. And I would argue that this comes out of the deregulation fervor of the late 70s and the 80s. And yes, some Democrats bought into it, thought, well, maybe we should, keep in mind, this is like a 30-year effort. The Powell memo was in 1971. Although in 1980, that was only a decade later. But the destruction of America, of America's values, just absolutely shocks me. Paul Krugman, for example, and the fact that in declaring this war against America and American values, Bannon came out over the weekend, I guess it was, and just came right out and said that Donald Trump's defunding of the $7 billion of the cost-sharing payments, the CSRs, that this was an intentional plan to blow up Obamacare. Right? A very specific and intentional plan to blow up Obamacare. This is not a test. This was not a political statement. It's just, we're going to do it. And people will die as a result of this. We know, Harvard University documented so well that on average, prior to the Affordable Care Act, about 44,000 Americans every year were dying because they didn't have access to health care, or the access that they had was so expensive that they didn't use it, or the medications that they got were so expensive that they couldn't afford them. And that number appears to be down to maybe 15 or 20,000 Americans are dying every year now because they don't have access to health care. And most of those are in the red states that did not expand Medicaid. But blowing this up is just it's going to devastate this country. So in my article, I started it out with,
President Jimmy Carter telling me on my radio show about the Citizens United decision. And I don't know if, Troy, do you have that as a regular clip? Can you, the Jimmy Carter on democracy? Yeah, no, it's all right. It's going to take you more than a minute. It's okay. Yeah, Jimmy Carter said that, I asked him, what do you think about Citizens United? He said, Citizens United violates the essence of what made America a great country and its political system. Now it's just an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery being the essence of getting the nominations for president or to elect the president. And the same thing applies to U.S. governors and senators and Congress members. So what we've seen is a complete subversion of our political system as a payoff to major contributors. This is the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, 3 years ago on this program. Just coming right out and saying it. And this complete subversion of our political system grew in large part out of Richard Nixon appointing Lewis Powell. In 71, Powell wrote the Powell Memo, encouraging the Chamber of Commerce to start getting politically active. In 72, Nixon put him on the Supreme Court. In 76, in the Buckley decision, the Supreme Court ruled that when billionaires or big corporations give money to politicians, and those politicians begin dancing to the tune of the billionaires and the big corporations, that is no longer considered bribery. That is now considered First Amendment protected free speech. Pretty bizarre, huh? We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happened to America as we knew it. How has America changed in your life? We'll be back. And welcome back. And let's see here. Claire in Laughlin, Nevada, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Claire, what's on your mind today?
Hi. The thing that I've noticed that no one else seems to is that the similarity to Donald Trump and Charles Manson are very close because according to all the press and everything, that Charles Manson was trying to start a race war. And that's why he had the women that were with him doing the murders.
I remember, Vince Bugliosi, before he passed away, he wrote Helter Skelter, which was the kind of the definitive book on the Manson crimes. And then, he wrote the impeachment of an American president, and about how to impeach George W. Bush for murder, for war crimes and things. And we've talked Vince Bugliosi and I about the Manson murders, and I recall his mentioning something about Manson thought he was going to start a race war. I mean that's Tim McVeigh basically thought that he was going to do something like that too. I mean Tim McVeigh's inspiration was the Turner Diaries, which is a novel that takes place, I think, probably more or less right around now. It was published back in the 60s or 70s. And in that book, a good white Christian, upset with how his government is seizing people's guns and repressing good white Christians, blows up a federal building in Oklahoma City, and the government responds by banning guns all across the country, which, with a draconian response. And in response to that, all the good white Christians rise up and start killing all people of color and Jews and Catholics. And pretty soon at the end of the book, the only people left standing are the good white Protestant men. And, we're back to a country with real values and all that kind of stuff. But equating Charles Manson to Donald Trump seems like a bridge too far, Claire, for me. It's, Trump, I don't think is getting joy out of killing people, for example. I mean, yes, he orders drone strikes and things like that, and people die. But I just don't think Trump is that, smart is the wrong word. And I would hate to say that, I think Charles Manson is smarter than Donald Trump. I don't have any idea, frankly. But is that what you're suggesting, Claire?
May I speak?
Yes, please.
Okay. I was actually there in 1971, and I was arrested when I was 18, and I was taken to Sybil Brand Prison. And I actually met, not intentionally, two of the women that were the Manson girls.
Whoa.
That was Leslie Van Houten and Sadie Atkins, okay? And I did not initiate the conversation. They did, okay? And this was right before they shaved their heads, and they had already been in prison for a year. And the book isn't quite as accurate, and neither are the news reports. But it was supposedly
to start a race war.
They wanted to start a race.
Yeah. Claire, I'm out of time, but that's a fascinating story. I hope you call back again and we can talk more about it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, thanks for calling. It's on your mind.
I just, I'm a little younger than you, and I've just seen a, gradual and maybe and sometimes a quick degeneracy from the times that I remember growing up, except for the fact that, for a brief period of time, apparently it seemed like African Americans and other groups, diversity, was, coming to the fore, and that seemed like a good thing. But actually, really we labor under, I guess, a capitalist system that is very aggressively capitalistic to the point where, truth and justice really don't have much to do with it. It's all about money, legalism, how you can, basically empower yourself over another person. It's really, in so many ways, just bankrupt. And I don't know how we're going to get out of it. We seem to be sliding in one direction. And people like yourself, I think, are doing a good service in trying to bring us away from it. And there's a lot of hopeful signs. But, this is, it's not a game of chess or anything. We're really... I mean, it's almost to the point where we better also start developing some kind of spiritual muscle, too, because you can stand on your head and spin and make all kinds of great arguments. Not yourself, I'm not talking about just you, but a lot of people. I listen to Amy Goodman every morning, and she's making very excellent points. Now, how do we get out of it? That's the thing, and so I'm hopeful because I think what else do you have but hope in the end? It is just glaringly different from the time I grew up as far as opportunities for people and whatnot. But I think most of it was built on a lot of wealth. We were the wealthiest country. We came out of 2 world wars, a shining, beacon on a hill, and I don't know. At some point, the wealthy just said, "Well, enough of this democracy stuff. We need to reassert ourselves over the population," and that's what they've done.
Yeah, it has been a takeover. It's really a remarkable thing, John, and it's not. It's like history. In fact, in my article for Alternate, I quoted Sam Clemens, Mark Twain, saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Whether he said it or not is a matter of debate, but it's typically attributed to him. And that we saw something very similar in the 1920s, that in the election of 1920, Warren Harding ran on the platform of less government in business, more business in government. In other words, deregulate and privatize. And which is essentially the same thing as Reagan. It's like the cycle just kind of came around, and we're still living in this Reagan period. And the deregulation leads to the airlines get to rip you off, the moving companies get to rip you off, the fast food companies get to serve you stuff that produces obesity and diabetes. The pharmaceutical companies get to make things that kill you and sell them and promote them and all that. It just goes on and on and on. And the banks, and Wells Fargo got busted for creating, all these millions of phony accounts and charging people for them. And so they had to pay a fine. But now, all the banks are funding a giant lobbying effort to eviscerate Dodd-Frank, which made it possible to, which created the Financial Oversight Bureau that made possible the stopping of Wells Fargo. I mean, it's just all the efforts of corporate America seem to be focused on taking down the, small d democracy, or a functioning republic. It's just mind-boggling to me. John, I got to move along, but thanks for the call. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I wanted to talk about these subsidies that Trump is not paying on the Affordable Care Act. Some of the policies that purchased on the exchange. This $7 or $8 billion is, first of all, you have to understand, this came as tax revenue collected from the pharmaceutical companies, but he's legally doesn't have to pay these subsidies because apparently Congress never specifically allocated these funds specifically for the subsidies.
Right, they authorized the executive branch to
the U.S. Treasury impounded,
right,
doing nothing. Congress has never appropriated this money, so it can't be spent to do anything. They can't even give the money back. If the Republicans thought that was a good thing to do, to give the money back to the pharmaceutical companies. So Trump has done this for the sole purpose of wrecking things, just wrecking everything.
Yep.
Because while the Affordable Care Act is still in place, because the Republicans could not repeal and replace, the insurance companies that stay on the exchanges still have to sell those silver plans. This applies to the silver plans at the same rate as if they were getting the subsidies.
Yep.
So the choice is to do that and then raise premiums on regular.
This is Donald Trump throwing a tantrum and breaking things. Well said, Paul. Thank you for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of the news of the day. My thoughts on that and your calls right after this.
And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist, Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been, and they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics, this is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number 2, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, there's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more. The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storm for the Presidency.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So what has happened to our country? And what direction is our country going? And how did we get here? It certainly seems to me that Reaganism is playing itself out the same way Hardingism played itself out in the 1920s. You get a boom followed by a bust. And Warren Harding, massive deregulation, massive privatization in the early 20s led to the Roaring 20s, which led to the crash of 1929. And I would submit to you the Dow just hit 23,000, that we are in the roaring, whatever it is, aught 17, and that if the cycle continues, at some point it's going to be a real challenge. But I'm looking at these political cycles too and thinking, wow, this is way over the top. This is way over the top. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, let me take you off a speaker.
Thank you.
Na zdrowie, comrade.
Yeah. What's up, Chaz?
You realize that's just because we are the largest territory of Russia, not about anything else, right?
Okay, all right.
Okay, listen, Republicans, conservatives are always banging on about freedom. Well, if you don't like it, move somewhere else. But you realize that like half of Republicans would be happy to live with a dictator ruling over them, right? A couple different polls have shown that.
Mm-hmm.
And they ask, well, you know, why would you forsake this freedom? And I ask, well, freedom for what? To go bankrupt medically? Is it freedom when old white men tell you what you can do with your uterus? When you've got the highest per capita and total incarceration rate in the world? Are you when you leave the house in a bulletproof vest? Did you see the story about this gal in Santa Rosa who had survived the Las Vegas shooting, got home and her house had burned down?
Right.
So,
yeah, the NRA didn't get her, the global warming did.
The what?
The NRA didn't get her, global warming did.
That's my point, Tom. I hated to pull the trigger so early in the week, but this is a compelling topic, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for the call, Chaz. Well said. Denise in Chicago. Hey, Denise, what's up?
Oh, hey, Tom. I'm enjoying your conversation, and you know, just the increasing of the incomes over the last 20 or so years, maybe more so where I'm at my age. I've been more cognitive and been seeing it. But I also just want to add another cultural aspect to it, and then I'll let you maybe give your insights at the end of the discussion. But I think, you know, it really starts with something that Trump did and has been very prominent out there with The Apprentice, television shows like Survivor, Big Brother, these dating shows where one individual girl gets the rose. And none of them really, from my perspective, have any kind of, you know, when they win Survivor, okay, you've learned how to take out your friend. You learned how to take out anybody else so that you yourself individually are the, you know, the king, the queen, and the one who wins. And I think that has a lot to do with the psyche. And I've seen it played out in corporate America in offices, you know, where people have lost that team kind of concept, and companies are trying to get that back at the same time because there are so many volatile environments out there where people are only thinking of themselves. And I just think it kind of wraps up in your conversation. I don't want to keep going on, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't think someone who wins Big Brother should gain celebrity status. You know, what do they do?
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of a dichotomy for me.
There's a fascinating post over at TPM this morning, Denise, in which the author is suggesting that there are two negotiating strategies, basically, when you're trying to accomplish something or when you're trying to compete with somebody. And one is the famous cliche of the win-win strategy. So, you know, we negotiate something, I get something, you get something, everybody gets something, we all win. The other is the win-lose strategy. The only way that person A knows that person B, or knows that they have won over person B, is if they destroy person B. And that apparently Donald Trump his whole life has used the win-lose strategy, that he has never been a win-win guy. And now we're seeing this applied to our country. And in our foreign relations, in our business relations, in our tax things, in our political parties, Democrats versus Republicans, Donald Trump versus Bob Corker, you know, Donald Trump versus everybody. It's he doesn't understand how to do win-win things. And as a consequence, we're not in a win-win country anymore. We're in this horrible win-lose situation. So I think that you're right, Denise, that there are huge cultural aspects to our economy, and that story about how you compete is one aspect of that. Denise, thanks for the call. Very, very well said. Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Thanks, Tom. I'm making a clarification on the reorganization of gun policy. On Friday's show, I had mentioned about how we might be able to reorganize our gun policies, and you had brought up that you liked your idea as well, but I didn't forsake your aspect of it. I just dropped it from the conversation due to time restraints.
Sure.
And then on the end of just taking your gun out the back door and shooting it up, I didn't necessarily mean that as a fact that if your property allows you to hunt out your back door or allows you to go to property that's adjacent to a field or a forest that allows you to hunt, then you can go out your back door and hunt. But once you leave your front door, you need to hire a company to take your gun to where you'll be shooting, either at a lodge or a farm.
I remember your argument, Dave. And you know, it makes a certain amount of sense, and probably there are variations of it in other countries. I just think it's extremely unlikely that we'll see something like that promulgated in the United States. But you know, I think it's a good idea. Dave, thanks for the call. Gary in Kingmont, West Virginia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thank you. You're back in the fresher air of Portland, Oregon, huh?
Indeed. Yeah. So what's up?
Yeah. Well, I have to do it. Greed has no heart ever. It's our cancer in America, and it's kind of ironic this is what you're talking about today. And and let me, if I may, address the questions you present, because you threw the question out there, which was the right question. To me, in my humble opinion, what has happened to America is rather simple to me. It's that history has repeated itself, and greed has become more intensely trenched. History has repeated itself, and culturally. And I'm not better people out there than me, but we seem to develop a culture of less gentlemen and less ladies that seem unable to deal with it. To me, that's what's happened.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And also we have been collectively wounded. I mean, the billionaires have been massively benefited, but Reaganism has collectively wounded the American working class, and as a consequence, you've got all these people who have been harmed, who actually have in fact, there was a great piece in, I think it was the New York Times over the weekend, in the magazine section about how when the steel mills left, people lost not only their jobs and good livelihoods, but they also lost their sense of identity. How badly we've all been wounded by this. And then once we are all experiencing, or many of us, large chunks of the American workforce are experiencing the shock of Reaganism and, the end of big government as we know it, and the end of the social safety net, all these kinds of things. The Republicans a year before a couple of years back, ending long-term unemployment benefits, for example, beyond 1 year, things like that. So then, people look around and go, okay, who screwed me? And Donald Trump comes along and says, it was those nasty Wall Street bankers, and it was those nasty, insiders, and it's the deep state, and and Steve Bannon is. We're going to deconstruct the state, right? Which is a metaphor for we're going to take apart America. And people go, well, okay, it's not working right now, so sure, what the heck? This is now not ignoring the fact that Donald Trump actually lost the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. But that said, still, what got him, at least as far as he is that a lot of people know that they've been wounded, that they've been injured by these policies. So anyhow, Gary, excellent points. Thank you. Ray in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, let me start by saying thank you for your voice and all this craziness. You provide a great service, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray.
The reason I'm calling is to expand on your opening story about the moving company situation, and it's an example that I call the racketeering of American business, and it's the health insurance business industry. We're originally from Canada, and we've lived here 22 years. We've been insured by a variety of different companies, and in all of that time, over the hundreds of invoices, roughly two-thirds of them have always been incorrect, and never once have they been less than what we should have paid. They've always been more.
Right.
And of course, those invoices are buried in impossibly complicated, a web of charges. So it's a business strategy. It's a systematic bilking and overcharging of the American healthcare consumers. It's disgusting.
Yeah, it's also profitable. It's insanely profitable. And you're absolutely right, Ray. And this is what I was talking about. You get either one of two things happens, right? When you deregulate an industry, you either get the situation like we have with healthcare or with banking, where a very small number of very, very large companies come to basically own the entire marketplace, or you get what I'm experiencing in the moving industry, which is where thousands of quote new competitors emerge, and on some of them are clearly not competing by providing good service. They're competing by lying to their customers and essentially, ripping them off. Ray, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls, the news of the day, and my thoughts on all of the above right after this. John in Vernon Hills, Illinois, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Long time no talk. I was ill, and my soulmate passed, so finally I was able to get through to you.
Oh, my.
And you are the professor mentor of political talk.
Thank you, John. I'm sorry to hear about your loss.
Well, I appreciate it. Anyway, you asked about what has changed. Two things major. Nobody ever locked their cars or their homes. Everything was safe.
Yep.
And guns were not possessed by very many people unless they were hunters or military or police.
Right.
So those two things have changed majorly. And also, the so-called leader, I don't call it a him. It is not human. There is no humanity. I believe it was hatched from an alien egg in the Bermuda Triangle.
You and Bill Maher. It's yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much for everything you do. I've been listening and watching you for over 8 years now, and my soulmate who passed said you have a photographic memory, and I believe what she has said.
Well, for a few things. There are other things I can't get to stick in, like people's names that I can't get to stick in there no matter how hard I try. But thank you for your kind comments, John, and spot on. I think your analysis is absolutely right. Kathy in Cambridge, Ohio, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Kathy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yet again, you are a respite for my tired brain. I find true therapeutic value in listening to your show, and I thank you for your resilience, your tenacity, and your survivorship of all of this with the rest of us. Just a quick thought that I've had and been repeatedly sharing with my family for decades, asking my children and grandchildren what the United States gross national product is anymore. And from time to time, I would refer to it as empty threats and idle promises, or the reverse. Mm-hmm. Lately, I have shortened it to the gross national product of the United States is greed.
Yeah.
And there's irony and pun and ugliness in that statement. I prefer to try to see the humor in it so that I can pass it on to neighbors, friends, and whomever will listen to this little old lady in the middle of the country and nowhere land.
Yeah.
Kathy, my analysis of what you're saying, or the way that I would say what you're saying, is that what we learned with the Great Crash of 1929 and through the 30s was that a certain amount of greed is necessary because it drives markets. It causes people to do things. But greed, it's like fire. You can use fire for a lot of really useful things, or you can burn your hand off with it. And so we decided to regulate greed. And, regulating corporations, regulating corporate behavior, regulating billionaire behavior. And that deregulation happened in the 80s, and now greed has run amok, has totally run out of control. And I think that's what you're saying. Is certainly how I would say it, and I think you said it very well. Kathy, thank you for the call. Great to hear from you, and thank you for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Freddie in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Freddie, what's on your mind today?
Tom, first-time caller, and
what happened, Freddie? Freddie, I think I've lost you here. I'm going to put Freddie on hold here, and he's on line. Oh, Freddie just vanished. Okay, Freddie, give us a call back, and we'll see what we can do here. Jenny in Asheville, what is that, Asheville, South Carolina? North Carolina? Jenny? What is going on? Hybrid number 1? Okay, I'm going to put Jenny on hold, and let's try another one. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, how you doing today, Tom?
Good. What's on your mind?
I'm just thinking about all of this stuff with Donald Trump. I really wanted to talk about him, but first of all, let's not forget that the Republicans are just sitting by idly. They're not doing anything. Paul Ryan isn't doing anything. Mitch McConnell is just letting everything slide because they're upset. I mean, they don't want to upset the cart because I think their main agenda is basically, as long as he can pass his biggest tax break ever, they're willing to deal with everything.
Yeah, and I think that they're going to support, the billionaires are going to support Trump as long as they think he's going to sign a tax break for them. But if it becomes obvious that he can't even pull that off, that's going to be the beginning of the end of the Trump presidency, in my opinion. That's the point at which most of the billionaires, probably the Mercer family accepted, are going to say, okay, we're pulling the plug.
But I think the reason why Trump is disassembling or trying to disassemble the Iran deal, and he's done away with this restriction on Obamacare, where they're going to give you less coverage and they're going to take away the subsidies, is because he's trying to make an argument that he inherited a mess. And the Democrats, to me, they have to come out in full force. They have to do whatever and just make this a campaign slogan. Everything that he's done, that he's undoing, Democrats made it better when Obama was there. So basically this is the fight. And, and one last thing I wanted to say, as far as this monument, as far as these Confederate monuments, what do you think about building a wall like we did for the Vietnam veterans? And we can have a wall for the Confederates and for the Union soldiers, and we could put the narrative on there that's right.
Charles, there's a big difference. The people who went off to Vietnam, whether it was voluntarily or involuntarily via the draft, at least many of them believed that they were fighting for the United States of America. The Confederate soldiers were fighting against the United States of America.
And that is the narrative we should put on the wall.
Yeah. This is like, never forget the treason that was committed in 1860 against the United States. I mean, that would be the way that I would take it if I was going to make any kind of a memorial, or if I was going to go around at all the Confederate war memorials all around the country and put a new plaque on them. Never forget the great treason. Never forget, here stands a statue of Stonewall Jackson, a traitor to his nation. That, in my opinion, is how it should be handled. Charles, thank you for the call. Well said. Carol in Manassas, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Good show.
Thank you.
I'd like to list a few things that are different from when I was in school in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, like John, we never locked our doors. I grew up in a small, basically affluent Republican town. But, you know, we didn't have to lock our doors or cars. I went to school with the same kids for 12 years. Not one who graduated with me was obese. Not one.
Yep.
And we had no junk food in our town.
Yep.
None.
Yep.
None. But the biggest thing right now is here we are, the richest country in the world, and our president is allowing Americans to drink toxic wastewater. I mean, that is just...
Oh, and he's increasing the supply of it.
Yes, I know. I mean, it also, back when I was young, taxes weren't a dirty word. I mean, it seemed like even Republicans, like Eisenhower, knew that you had to have taxes. You had to have revenue to build highways and bridges.
Eisenhower maintained a top tax rate of 91%.
Yeah, I know. And we got things done.
Yes.
But today, thanks to Grover Norquist or, whatever, it's a dirty word. You can't mention taxes. You can't mention socialism. I mean, it's ridiculous. And it's all from Reagan and the marriage of Reagan with Powell, which I think was the first gay marriage. But anyway, they got it together and they really destroyed this country over time.
I think it's an ongoing process, but I don't disagree. Carol, thank you. William in 9 Mile Falls, Washington. Hey, William, what's on your mind?
Well, Tom, just to add to the conversation here is what's going on. To me, it's a matter of between computers knowing everything about you and advertising, it's proof advertising works. When Frank Luntz gets his focus group together, after a couple of focus groups, he can honestly convince somebody that he's killing you for your own good, and they buy it.
Yeah.
When Amazon merges with Walmart and Fox merges with Sinclair Broadcasting, you're never going to get a bunch of news. You're just going to get what they want you to hear.
Yeah. Well, we're by and large not getting news right now. I'm by and large getting what they want us to hear. And but yeah, I think your point is well taken, and those mergers are not being contemplated right now. But it's functionally the same thing. I mean, you've got all these giant corporations. They have interlocking boards of directors. The CEOs are all members of the Business Roundtable, which is the 200 biggest companies in America. They're CEOs. John Snow used to be the head of that. George W. Bush made him transportation secretary, you may recall. And it is a very powerful thing. The impact of advertising on us, the impact of all this media, but in particular, the biggest problem in my mind, William, is that our media is telling us what is going to be most profitable for the media rather than what is most useful or important for us to know in order to be functioning, high integrity, honest members of a democratic republic. And, whether we're Democrats or Republicans, we are not being well served by our media. William, thank you for the call. We'll be back right after.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Our Thom Hartmann University book review of the day is Richard Belzer's new book, Corporate Conspiracies, How Wall Street Took Over Washington. This is from the introduction. Of all the books we researched for this work, the title we loved the most was this one, Regime Change Begins at Home, Freeing America from Corporate Rule. We loved it because it presents as a hard fact something that very few people completely understand. And then he quotes from that book. Since 1980, America has been run by a corporate regime that has co-opted both political parties and shifted sovereignty from we the people to transnational corporations. End of quote. Since this book covers some corporate conspiracies, we will no doubt take a lot of heat for that and be deridingly referred to as conspiracy theorists. So we would just like to remind people that the phrase conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the Central Intelligence Agency, to be used as a weaponized term with which to discourage people from seeking the truth. We kid you not. CIA document 1035-960, dated April 1, 1967, regarding the agency's concern about the reputation of the American government, in quotes. That document also suggested various tactics for countering, quote, conspiratorial arguments, which confronted the gaping holes critics observed in the findings of the Warren Commission, which investigated, in quotes, they really did no such thing in reality, the assassination of President Kennedy. Quote, the agency also directed its members to employ propaganda assets to negate and refute the attacks of the critics, end quote. So as you can see, and as the Freedom of Information Act release of that CIA document clearly reveals, the use of the term conspiracy theorist is actually a conspiracy itself. But if you believe rightly that Julius Caesar and hundreds of other leaders were the victims of conspirators, as they were, then you're an evil conspiracy theorist, right? Well, if anybody actually believes that, then you'd better read up on your history, boys and girls, because conspiracies are an ongoing and very common occurrence in human conduct. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Are you aware that many friends of Robin Williams believe that his suicide was the direct result of the prescription drugs he was taking, and that over 23,000 suicides are attributed to psychiatric drugs each year in the United States? Did you know that turning prisons into a big business has resulted in the United States having the highest incarceration rate in the history of the world, and that most are just drug crimes? Are you aware that the historic event of the toppling of the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq was actually a U.S. military PSYOPs, psychological operations warfare, program, a completely orchestrated event with the knowledge and assistance of U.S. media, and not a spontaneous event as it was portrayed by our media? Did you know that the Pentagon is sending $1.5 trillion of our tax dollars to their corporate buddies for a new fighter jet that's already superfluous? Are you aware that continuing to rely on oil instead of investing in low-carbon energy solutions will cost us $44 trillion due to climate change? Did you know that companies like General Motors at times know that their products will kill people, but they do nothing because it's actually cheaper to compensate the victims than it is to correct the problem? Then read and learn on, friends. American corporations have been getting away with murder, literally, for many, many years. Just take a good look at their history. The above example of GM is a proven point. Corporate consumer advocate Clarence Ditlow, executive director of the nonprofit Center for Automotive Safety, bitterly criticized the settlement. Quote, GM killed over 100 people by knowingly putting a defective ignition switch into over 1 million vehicles, Ditlow said. Today, thanks to its lobbyists, GM officials walk off scot-free while its customers are 6 feet under. Tobacco companies knowingly lied about the harmful effects of cigarettes for decades, even though there was plenty of known medical proof of their damage. They even knowingly hid that information from the public. Oil, gas, and chemical companies have been knowingly polluting our planet with cancer-causing chemicals and products also for decades, and they know that they're doing it. Pharmaceutical companies have lied and attempted to minimize news coverage regarding the deaths that they know the drugs will cause. That's murder, plain and simple. Maybe you can paint a public relations damage control over that landscape if you happen to have all their tons of money and paid political influence, but it's still murder. Look at the parents of one of their victims straight in the eye and try and tell them it's not murder. You honestly think they'll listen to you? This book is an effort to reveal the insanity of corporate greed once and for all. At this point, most people probably care more about their local football team than they do about the workings of our democratic republic. And while we understand their frustration and their reasons, that's not good enough, folks. We have to all get involved to stop these bastards from getting away with what they've been getting away with for far too long. They're robbing us blind, poisoning our planet, hijacking our democracy, and ruining the futures of our children and grandchildren. They must be stopped. As an agent of the U.S. government employed to implement policies to benefit U.S. corporations, John Perkins noted in his classic work, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that corporate America has extended its rule beyond our borders. Quoting from Perkins, what we had previously considered U.S. corporations were now truly international, even from a legal standpoint. Many of them were incorporated in a multitude of countries. They could pick and choose from an assortment of rules and regulations under which to conduct their activities, and the multitude of globalizing trade agreements and organizations made this even easier. Corporatocracy had become a fact, and it increasingly exerted itself as the single major influence on world economics and politics. Sad to make this observation, but we have become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, liberals have brought us a lot. You look back over the history of the United States, you see, liberals brought us the United States to begin with. Thomas Jefferson was a product of the Enlightenment. These guys were all pointing to the Enlightenment. So brought us literally the United States of America, brought us the right to free speech, brought us the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. All of them liberals brought the end of slavery. Liberals brought the right to vote and expanded the right to vote, first to freed slaves, then to women. Liberals brought you the weekend. Liberals defined decent wages, workman's comp, workplace benefits, the vacation. Liberals brought you the weekend. I mean, literally. Parental paid time off. Liberals brought you public education, free public education, and raised millions out of poverty. Science, medicine, rural electricity, writes Joshua Eric Turcotte over at the Quora website. And all of these things, even the GI Bill, which was passed after World War II, the Republicans fought against the GI Bill, which provided benefits to 8 million American veterans. More than 8 million of them used just the college benefits, as my father did. I can't think of anything that the Republicans have brought us, certainly in my lifetime, of any comparable benefit. And yet the Republicans are running around right now saying it's time to take down the New Deal and the Great Society. All this list of things that I just read. So with us on the line right now is Julio Rivera. He is the editorial director at Reactionary Times, columnist with Newsmax, right-wing news, and Politichicks, reactionarytimes.com, the website. Oh, yeah, it's Julio, is his Twitter handle. Hey, Julio, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Tom. I was listening to you there just for a moment, and I couldn't help but realize that you omitted the fact that the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments were
Julio.
Republican Party.
Hey, Julio.
Credit to liberals.
Hey, Julio.
That's not true.
Julio, can you pick up your phone? I can't hear you.
Okay. Hi, Tom. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, now I can hear you. So start over again. I couldn't hear you.
And I have to say this because I listened to what you said as we were leading into my segment. The 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments were brought to America by the Republican Party.
When the Republicans were liberals, yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. I'm talking liberal conservative, not Democrat Republican.
The other part of it, too, is who filibustered the Civil Rights Act in 1964 for 57 days?
Conservatives.
The Democrat Party. There was no switching of ideologies. That's such a big
It was conservatives. It was Southern conservatives. It was Strom Thurmond. I was alive then, Julio. I remember. They were conservatives.
Parties, and you can't base him. You can't.
So
base the
please
fact that
tell me anything that conservatives have brought us.
Saying that the entire thing switched. That's not true.
Julio, in the 66 years I've been on this planet, I cannot think of one single thing conservatives have brought us that has been of benefit to the United States. Can you please name one?
Really? Listen. Conservative reforms are the only thing that's going to bring back this
Please name one.
You know, listen to the cutting taxes in the 80s. Cutting taxes in the 80s led to an economic boom.
No, it did not.
Are you kidding me?
No,
yes,
cutting taxes in the 80s led to the biggest crash since the Great Depression.
You guys cutting taxes, hyperinflation, all these things, but there's no proof to it. In the 1980s, we grew by leaps and bounds.
We actually grew slower in the 80s than we did in the 70s, 60s, or 50s, Julio. Look it up.
Democrat John F. Kennedy as well. So it's not like it hasn't been done on both sides.
Julio, we grew
a blue dog Democrat.
You are completely
what we have today.
You are completely reinventing history. First of all, John Kennedy.
History. You're reinventing history, my man.
John Kennedy campaigned on raising taxes on rich people by closing loopholes, dropping the top rate and closing the loopholes. He campaigned on it. He debated Richard Nixon on it. I may even have the audio to play for.
Nobody disagrees with that, but I mean, but the rates across the board should be brought down as they were in the 80s. Reagan gave tax cuts to every, on
Reagan's
every level
cutting taxes exploded the deficit, Julio. Your choice. Which would you rather have? Lower taxes on billionaires and a huge deficit or no deficit?
Nobody's going to argue that. But that had a little bit more to do with Tip O'Neill.
But, Julio, so let me get this straight. Let me hang on just a second. Let me just get this straight. I just said, okay, in the last 66 years, can you think of anything that conservatives have brought us that has been a benefit to the United States? And you said basically tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires.
No, tax cuts for everyone.
Okay, tax cuts for everyone.
That what we should have.
I would argue that did not do
in order to make it more competitive for smaller and mid-sized businesses to compete with the large corporatists.
Then why have the smaller and mid-sized businesses been wiped out by big corporations?
That favors the rich, but it's not because of Donald Trump, and it's not because of conservative policy.
So the only thing from the last 60-plus years that conservatives have done that has been, in your opinion, a benefit to America is cutting taxes in the 80s. Is that what you're saying?
How about the fact that we defeated communism? How about that? You want to give Reagan credit for that?
I think that you could safely say that was brought to you by liberals.
You're opposed to because you believe in communism and socialism. That's where the divide comes in, Tom.
Julio, you are unable to identify anything that conservatives have done for America.
No, I did. So, we cut taxes. We increased the military. We brought, we ended the scourge of the USSR. I mean, I think that's a positive thing. We brought some semblance of, their version of capitalism to Russia, but at least we did that. I mean, those are good things. We consistently fight for life. You think that liberalism, which has killed millions and millions, it's been a genocide of the black community after Roe versus Wade. Do you think that that's something positive in this country? Why is the black community still only 13% of the population for the last 100 years? I'll tell you why. Because of Planned Parenthood.
This is bizarre, Julio. So your solution, you're saying that the good thing that conservatives would do for America if they had an opportunity with regard to abortion is outlawing it altogether. Do I have that correct?
Not outlawing it altogether. Give it back to the states. Let them decide how they want to run it. But there has to be
so some people can live in
liberals nowadays. They want late-term abortion up to the birth. That's inhumane.
So once again, Julio, you are unable to identify anything that conservatives have brought us.
Over and over again doesn't make it true. I did identify. I identified three things.
No, and I'm disputing them. I'm saying that the restrictions on abortion lead to actually more abortions, and they lead to greater dangers for women. The tax cuts that Trump brought us. If he keeps talking over me, just pot him down a little bit, please. The tax cuts that Bush brought us and that Reagan brought us just exploded the distance between very, very rich and very, very poor in America.
Bush was not as comprehensive, and he should have been more.
I'm not seeing anything here.
Bush was a little bit more further to the left, obviously, than Reagan was.
And then Steve Bannon comes along and says, yes, Trump is doing away with the CSRs because he wants to destroy Obamacare. He wants to destroy health care for Americans, for low-income
He wants to
Americans.
expand choices for Americans. And the interstate sale of insurance and taking away what's referred to as like either mandatory minimums or essential benefits, people should be able to purchase a la carte what they want. Why should I have to pay for a sex change for somebody across the country if I don't feel
because
that
we're
it's
all in the same
morally
pool,
in line
Julio.
with my religious values? Why should I have to pay for
because we're all in the same pool. Why should I pay taxes when I don't have kids
we
in
shouldn't
schools?
be in the same pool. No, because making one direct pool to me is a violation of the First Amendment.
What?
It's a violation of the First Amendment.
So you think that if somebody is drawing
Social
Social Security and you disagree with their lifestyle, that you shouldn't pay into Social Security?
Well, nobody said anything about Social Security. Now you're taking one thing.
Well, I'm taking your logic, which is, you don't like that the government is helping somebody out that you don't like.
If I don't believe in, let's say I'm like Rick Santorum, and I don't believe in birth control. Rick Santorum has like 8 to 10 kids or something like that. If you don't believe in birth control, then why should you have to pay it if it violates your First Amendment right to freedom of religion?
So somebody who doesn't believe, somebody who doesn't believe
into a system that's providing birth control and abortion. That's wrong. That's morally wrong.
This is bizarre. Julio Rivera, reactionarytimes.com is the website. You can tweet him at, oh yeah, it's Julio. Julio, thanks for dropping by today.
Hey, thank you so much, Tom. Always a pleasure.
Good talking to you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Okay, so we've had this contest running on this show for a decade. If you can name even one good thing Republicans have done in my lifetime, I'll send you a book. And welcome back. Melvin in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Hey, Melvin, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
You were asking, what has happened to America, and I could tell it just in my lifetime. I'm not that old. I'm 55. But just in I remember when Ronald Reagan was elected president, and it wasn't an easy time, the best I can remember. It was a hard way to go. But it's just like everything else, these Republicans, they're rushed to privatize and tax cut, just like the last guy you were talking to. They do not make no sense what they're doing, and I'm slowly watching my American experience being hijacked, by corporations and tax cutters and people that won't even listen to reason or logic. It's just astounding that these people are like brainwashed or something. I'm not really sure what it is. I just seen you in an argument with Julio. It's just like having an argument. He's probably from Arkansas.
I don't know where he's from, but
that's just like what is here, the way it is here. You try to have a conversation and it just wears you out. Like Obamacare.
Yeah,
it saved my life. And now I'm watching it slowly be ripped away from me, by the subsidy takeaway. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it truly is. It truly is. Melvin, very well said. Thank you for the call. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Lowell, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. We were speaking a little bit earlier about what has changed in our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. And one of the major things that's changed in my lifetime is the fundamental calculations that a lot of our society is based on. For example, the unemployment calculation and the CPI calculation. These are what destroy our seniors and non-homeowners. For example, the CPI calculation doesn't include housing. My grandmother's rent went up 81%, but her Social Security went up like 0.5%.
That is a substantial difference. Are you sure the CPI does not include housing?
If it does, they aren't including everybody's housing, because if housing prices are going up, say 10% a year or more, the CPI calculation should factor that in.
Yeah, you're right. I wonder if they took it out because they thought it was too volatile. But this is something, Bernie Sanders talked about this for years on this program, and I've been, enthusiastically agreeing with him all this time, is that seniors have different consumption patterns, purchasing patterns, because they have different needs than do people in their 20s and 30s. You know, it's more heavily weighted toward just basic survival stuff and medical care, and less heavily weighted towards toys and vacations and goodies. And we really need a cost of living metric, a system, a way for analyzing the cost of living that is applied to Social Security increases that actually reflects what it costs to be retired and live on Social Security. We don't have that. And
also for the unemployment, too. The unemployment calculations, you know, I saw an article recently in the New York Times that showed, you know, that cities in California are facing these major homeless crises. Every one of those people is technically unemployed. So that should go toward the unemployment numbers, and programs need to be added to help those.
Yeah, well said. Totally agree. Lowell, thank you. Very well said. We'll be right back.
On April. I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see, that was Julio. And this, you know, this whole long list, there's Clint Gold wrote a piece in the Tulsa World some years ago. This was in 1999. And he was talking about the various programs that have been brought to you. This is America, right? Brought to you by progressives. Whether it was progressive Abraham Lincoln or progressive Thomas Jefferson, but, you know, the modern day progressives, Social Security, Medicare, every single one of these programs was opposed by conservatives. Every single one. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Peace Corps, unemployment insurance, welfare both for the poor and for corporations. Actually, the conservatives supported welfare for corporations, and they continue to. Civil rights, student grant and loan programs, safety laws like OSHA, environmental laws like the EPA. In fact, conservatives right now are trying to undo these regulations, trying to make America less safe, trying to make our air more poisonous, because it's profitable for the people who fund them. Environmental laws, prevailing wage laws, the right to collective bargaining, which, by the way, unions brought about paid medical insurance, paid vacations and pensions and things like that. That's all the result of the labor movement, which was liberals. Workers' compensation, the Marshall Plan. It blows my mind that conservatives actually opposed the Marshall Plan. Conservatives opposed the GI Bill, paid vacations, paid medical insurance, a flood disaster insurance, school lunch programs, women's rights. In every single one of these cases, conservatives have opposed them. The Fair Labor Standards Act, which established a 40-hour week and put child labor laws into place, established a minimum wage, all opposed by conservatives. The FHA and HUD, which created, public housing and built 44 million residential homes. Before World War II, about 70% of America were renters. By the mid-1970s, about 70% of America was homeowners. Now, that has been declining. It's in the 60s now. It's been steadily declining as a result of Reaganomics, but, it's still there. Farm conservation subsidies, USDA programs, the Farmers Home Administration, small flood control lakes. There's more than 3,000 just in Oklahoma, for example. Rural water districts, rural electricity, the REA, Rural Electrification Administration. The GI Bill, millions of returning veterans. The Republicans totally opposed the GI Bill. Why? Because they thought that all these veterans coming back to the United States would be a source of cheap labor. Throw them into the labor markets. The cost of labor is going to collapse, right? It's going to destroy the unions. Well, instead, Democrats passed a law saying, no, they can go to college. 8 million Americans, people like my dad and Louisa's dad, both went to college on the GI Bill, creating millions of entrepreneurs. For the unemployed GI, there was $20 a week for a year, which was basically a lot of money back then. I mean, we're today maybe the equivalent of $300-400. The Veterans Administration, 2 million home loans, and it goes on. For the bankers, liberals saved the banking industry with the creation of the FDIC and the FSLIC, ensuring deposits. They saved Wall Street with the creation of the Securities and Exchange Commission. These were things Franklin Roosevelt did in the 1930s. And it goes on and on. I mean, it's just, so what have Republicans brought us? I can think of nothing. And I just, and not only do I disagree with Julio on, well, they brought us tax cuts in the 80s, and that was a wonderful thing. The tax cuts in the 80s just made inequality in the United States worse. And Reagan tripled the national debt. Reagan ran up more debt in his 8 years in the White House than all the other presidents of the United States, if you take non-wartime presidents of the United States, combined. That's how much debt Reagan ran up with his tax cuts. And, we had a banking collapse, the savings and loan industry. Reagan deregulated the S&Ls in anticipation of then shortly thereafter deregulating Wall Street. He deregulated the S&Ls, and so, boom, they started behaving unethically. They started being driven by greed, as it were. And guess what? The S&Ls went down in flames. There was a complete collapse of the entire savings and loan industry. So, did the Republicans learn that lesson? Bill Seidman came in, and in fact, I recommend that you go over to YouTube and check out Bill Seidman's. He passed away a little while ago, but at Grand Rapids State College, I think it is, Bill Seidman, the guy who ran the agency that basically, they nationalized the savings and loans banks, the S&Ls, and then slowly reprivatized them in the 80s as a result of this huge disaster Reagan made. And you would think that the Republicans would look at that, or the conservatives would look at that and go, okay, when we deregulated the S&Ls, bad behavior followed, and a crash of the S&Ls followed that. And you'd think that they'd think, so maybe we shouldn't do the same thing with the big Wall Street banks. But sure enough, here we go, 1999, 2000, let's deregulate the big Wall Street banks. And guess what happens in 2007? I mean, it takes about 7-8 years, right? It did in 1921, Warren Harding deregulated the banks. In 1929, they crashed. In 2000, we deregulated the banks. 2007, 8, 9, they crashed. What a surprise. What have Republicans brought us? Really? Nothing.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader. This particular chapter is an excerpt from my book Threshold, by the way. But this is from page 312 of the collected, my collected writings, as it were. It's titled Sociopathic Paychecks. And it starts out with a quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince, 1943. I know a planet where there is a certain red-faced gentleman. He has never smelled a flower. He has never looked at a star. And all day he says over and over, just like you, I am busy with matters of consequence. And that makes him swell up with pride. But he is not a man, he is a mushroom. Okay, to the book. Americans have long understood how socially, politically, and economically destabilizing are huge disparities in wealth. For this reason, the U.S. military and the U.S. civil service have built into them systems that ensure that the highest paid federal official, including the president, will never earn more than 20 times the salary of the lowest paid janitor or Army private. Most colleges have similar programs in place, with the ratios ranging from 10 to 1 to 20 to 1 between the president of the university and the guy who mows the grass. From the 1940s through the 1980s, this was also a general rule of thumb in most of corporate America. When CEOs took more than their fair share, they were restrained by their boards so that the money could be used instead by the company for growth and to open new areas of opportunity. The robber baron J.P. Morgan himself suggested that nobody in a company, including his company, should earn more than 20 times the lowest paid employee. Although he exempted stock ownership from that equation, he owned most of the stock. During the greed is good era of the 1980s, something changed. CEO salaries began to explode at the same time that the behavior of multinational corporations began to change. When Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, a mergers and acquisition mania filled the air, and as big companies merged to become bigger, they shed off redundant parts. The result was a series of waves of layoffs as entire communities were decimated, divorce and suicide rates exploded, and America was introduced to the specter of the armed, disgruntled employee. Accompanying the consolidation of wealth and power of these corporations was the very real redefinition of employment, from providing a living wage to people in the community to a variable expense on a profit and loss sheet. Companies that manufactured everything from clothing to television sets discovered that there was a world full of people willing to work for 50 cents an hour or less. Throughout America, factories closed and a building boom commenced among the Asian tigers of Taiwan, South Korea, and Thailand. The process has become so complete that of the millions of American flags bought and waved after the World Trade Center disaster, 9/11, most were manufactured in China. Very, very, very few things are still manufactured in the United States outside of the defense industry, weapons. And it wasn't unthinking, unfeeling corporations that took advantage of the changes in the ways the Sherman Antitrust Act and other laws were enforced by Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, and Bush Jr. administrations. It took a special type of human person. In his manuscript, Toys, War, and Faith, Democracy in Jeopardy, Major William C. Gladish suggests that this special breed of person is actually a rare commodity and thus highly valuable. He notes that corporate executives make so much money because of simple supply and demand. There are, of course, many people out there with the best education from the best school, raised in upper-class families who know how to play the games of status, corporate intrigue, and power. The labor pool would seem to be quite large, but Gladish points out there's another and more demanding requirement to meet. They must be willing to operate in a runaway economic and financial system that demands the exploitation of humanity and the environment for short-term gain. This is a disturbing contradiction to their children's interest and their own intelligence, education, cultural appreciation, and religious beliefs. It's the second requirement, Gladish notes, that drastically reduces the number of quality candidates for corporations to pick from. Most people in this group are not willing to forsake God, family, and humanity to further corporate interests in a predatory financial system. For the small percentage of people left, the system continues to increase salaries and benefit packages to entice the most qualified and ruthless to detach themselves from humanity and become corporate executives and their hired guns. One of the questions often asked when the subject of CEO pay comes up is, what would a person like William McGuire or Rex Tillerson, the CEOs of United Healthcare and ExxonMobil, respectively, possibly do to justify a $1.7 billion paycheck or a $400 million retirement bonus? It's an interesting question. If there's a free market for labor or CEOs, you'd think there'd be a lot of competition for the jobs. And a lot of people competing for the positions would drive down the pay. All that United Healthcare stockholders would have to do to avoid paying more than $1 billion to McGuire is find somebody to do the same CEO job for $500 million. And all they'd have to do to save even more is find somebody to do the job for a mere $100 million. Or maybe even somebody who'd work the necessary 60-hour weeks for only $1 million. So why is executive pay so high? I've examined this question with both my psychotherapist hat on and my amateur economist hat on, and only one rational answer presents itself. CEOs in America make as much money as they do because there really is a shortage of well-trained sociopaths. The book is, ultimately it's from Threshold, but it's in the Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and boy, what a day. What an amazing time that we are living in. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I wanted to answer the question about what's changed in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
One very noticeable thing, and actually I recollected it this weekend when I was listening to an interview with John Kasich, and he was asked about the consequences of the United States pulling out of the Iran deal. And he said that, countries like China and Russia, we risk countries like China and Russia, authoritarian states, of kind of, emerging to replace America as, a responsible party.
Yep.
And, but what he got me thinking about, I'm not, I would never vote for John Kasich, okay? But he got me thinking about Kasich voters and Trump voters and how in America, a lot of people, they actually don't like to think for themselves. They actually prefer authoritarianism and being told what to do. And I really started noticing this when George Bush was president, so I don't want to blame, everything on Trump. I think Trump's just taken advantage of that.
Oh, I agree.
And,
I agree. And John Dean pointed this out in his book, Conservatives Without a Conscience, or Conservatives Without Conscience, I think is the title, that about 20% of people, not just Americans, but about 20% of people have what are called authoritarian tendencies. A very small percentage of that 20%, way fewer than 1% of the population are authoritarian leader types. And the majority are authoritarian follower types. And they are people who want to follow an authoritarian leader, which is what you're describing, Dave.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I don't know if you intended for this, but since I started listening to you, you've convinced me that a lot of it is because of economic factors. See, I never really bought off on that before until I started listening to you, and I think it's true. I think the more perilous our economic condition is, the more we tend towards authoritarianism as a kind of solution, as a kind of fix.
Yeah.
And it really scares me. It's very troubling.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Dave. And I also share your concern. Thanks a lot for the call, Dave. Rob in Minnesota. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I work in the transportation industry, and it's where I heard that you're having a problem with a trucking company.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Most transportation companies are very conservative Republicans, and most of the truck drivers out here are conservative Republicans. You get 10 of them put together in any one situation, and I can guarantee you there's only one or two of me and a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
But anyway, the way I wanted to be able to take and finally get it to you is where, under the circumstances, guess what? You're a liberal. You've been blackballed.
Could be. I don't think that this company is singling me out because I'm a liberal, though, because when I went on Yelp and read the reviews, there's more than 20 people saying that they've had the exact same experience that we've had. I think that they're just running a business model that is, less than straightforward. And
if you really want to push it a little bit farther, every single truck out here has an ICC number on the door. Call up the Interstate Commerce Commission, make a complaint. Might be able to make a move a little bit.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, thank you for that, Rob. Appreciate the call. Jerry in Asheville, Jenny, in Asheville. Asheville's in North Carolina, right? Jenny?
Hello?
Hi, Jenny.
Hello? Hey, Tom?
Yes, you're on the air. We made it. What's up?
This is Jerry. Jerry in Asheville, North Carolina. Okay, thank you. I'm just calling because I haven't heard anybody put together the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump became president, even though he really didn't want to be, but if he became president, what he wanted to do was make sure that what was in it for him, and it was getting rid of the estate tax was a big thing. And I feel that what he's done by removing, taking, some, 10 million people and getting rid of the payments that they're going to get and make it that the premiums are going to go up for them, taking basically that $7 billion that should be going there, he's going to put that towards the deficit so that whenever he gets rid of the estate tax for himself and 1.6 of the population, then he can say, oh, well, we didn't raise the deficit because we made sure that we got that money back in there. Although, as I understand it, that's actually not going to be the way it works, but I think that's the way he thinks it'll work as much as he thinks. I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
I think that you're right, Jenny, and I also think that this piece on over at Talking Points Memo this morning really it was a real eye opener for me. The idea that Donald Trump does not understand win-win negotiations. He only understands win-lose, and the only way that he knows that he's winning is when he can see someone else losing. He has to see the other person lose, be humiliated, be trashed. It's why he doesn't pay contractors. It's why it explains not only his business practices but also his politics. He doesn't understand win-win strategies, and therefore doesn't pursue them. He doesn't know how to do it. And I think that you're absolutely right that basically he's taking down health care for average working Americans so that he can fund tax breaks, in this case the estate tax and others for the billionaire class. I think you're absolutely right. Very well said. Jenny, thank you for the call. Greg in Lompoc, California. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I tell you, when that guy calls in or agrees to talk with you, you just take him to the woodshed. It's amazing.
Julio?
Yeah.
Well, I suspect he thought he did that to me. Who knows?
No,
I'll let people. I trust my listeners to have enough intelligence to sort out who won, who lost, what's right, what's wrong.
Yeah, I listen faster than he can talk. That's the key.
Yeah.
When it comes to what your challenging question is what have conservatives brought to the table ever? I think I have just one answer, and that is the twitching eyebrow of one William F. Buckley.
It's so strange, Greg, that you say that, because just before you started, even before you said the twitching eyebrow, I was thinking William F. Buckley on Firing Line once said that the role of a conservative is to stand athwart the arc of history with his hand out shouting, stop. And going back to the 60s when remembering Barry Goldwater, who I when I was 13 years old campaigned for, and looking at conservatives back then, the conservative movement at that point in time was not this, let's make the billionaires, more billions, let's help out the rich, let's screw the poor. Conservatives back then were my dad's conservatives were more, hey, let's think this through. Let's do this carefully. Let's not make any mistakes here. That's what it meant to be a conservative, to be, yes, they were in favor of progress, but measured, careful, quanta, progress rather than radical, rapid change, which is what, liberals were calling for. And in that context, I would say that, having conservatives and liberals in the same political dialogue so that they can basically kind of be a check to each other, not a paralyzing check like we have right now, but rather a balancing check, the Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan thing, is arguably a very good thing for this country.
Have yielded more than the ACA style health care plan that was finally hammered out back in the day. But it's also interesting that you were a young conservative to begin with, and so was I, because I didn't know any different. My dad was pretty much along the same lines as your dad.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, had we learned so much since then.
Oh, yeah. Well, and my dad was an Eisenhower Republican. He was not, there were not Reagan Republicans at that point in time. Although, he to the day he died, he identified himself as a conservative Republican. But I think he's been gone for some time. I just think he'd be horrified by what's going on right now. Greg, thanks for the call. Well said. Vicky in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Vicky, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Firstly, I'd just like to compliment you and thank you for being the voice of historical fact to offset this fake news, which was previously known as propaganda.
Thank you, Vicky.
what I called about is drug addiction in this country. And I think it ties into what you're describing today, because I was listening to 60 Minutes last night, and it talked about a whistleblower from the DEA that worked there for decades and was finally driven out. And how that all took place was that there was a previous DEA employee, Lyndon Barbie, who ended up leaving, working for the pharmaceutical industry, and thereby wrote a bill that would strip the DEA ability to fight drug trade.
Right.
And he got the Republican Bill Morano to sponsor this bill, and it took a couple years of debate in Congress, and the drug companies spent $1.6 million to defeat it, or I guess what I would say is defeat DEA, try to promote the bill, the Morano bill. And during that debate in Congress, there was a representative from the DEA who had worked there for decades, Joe Manzini, and he testified over 30 times to oppose this bill and the effect it would have on their being able to pursue the drug manufacturers that were really rampantly selling.
Right. But the lobbyists prevailed anyway, right, Vicki?
And he was driven out.
Yeah. Vicki, we're running out of time, but thank you for the call. It's very, very well said. Spot on. Thank you so much. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
See, with Reaganism, virtually every industry in the United States now has been warped to the point where profit is the only thing that matters. And welcome back. Pete in Iron Mountain, Michigan. Hey, Pete, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Oh, Tom, it's wonderful to talk to you. I really appreciate you being there. You're just an amazing person and an amazing person to talk to.
Well, thank you, Pete. I hear you just fine. So, thank you. What's up?
Oh, there's a little bit of a comm lag in our talk, but anyway, yeah. What I'm concerned about is, the hole in the soul of conservatives. That they've got a virtual hole in the soul, and the hole of the soul is utter greed. Greed. I mean, greedy bastards, and it kind of impinges on what you said earlier about that conservatives have only one value, and it's profit, money. Money, and it basically where the money goes, it goes right into mammonism, the worship of money. That's what mammonism is, and these people are so selfish and so greedy. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, when you talk to a conservative person, you will not have a conversation. What you'll get is gaslighting. Have you heard about that?
I have, and I think we saw an example of it about 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago.
Oh, yeah, what was that? Was it a moron's name anyway? Jose or not Jose?
It's Julio. Julio, he's not a moron. Yeah. Julio's a reasonably smart and I know Julio outside of being on the air. He's a decent guy. I just don't get his politics. I know where his politics are. He works for something called Newsmax. Yeah. And Newsmax is a rightist shill organization. Yep. It is just incredible and sickening. I just got a magazine. I'm sure that it's a Newsmax magazine. And basically what they think the problem are, these Republicans, they only understand responsibility as blame. And so what they're blaming currently is the deep state. This is the problem now. They're really down at their little wits' end. They don't have very many wits or intelligence, believe me. But anyway, it's the blame game. Yep. And so it's back to gaslighting again. Anytime anybody
brings up anything, they'll just gaslight the shit out of them.
Oh, but you can't talk like that, Pete.
Talk.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My apologies to our affiliates for that language slipping through there. Okay. Billy in Arkansas. Hey, Billy, what's on your mind today?
Hey there, Tom. I'm kind of snitching off the Northwest Arkansas Times newspaper here.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to write in letters to them, and our Republicans that are set on the paper aren't allowing my stories, most of them, to be written, and I've used nice language as nice as you can with this situation. And what I wanted to tell you is I was writing a letter to the people that are Trump supporters, and most of them aren't old enough to remember what me and you are back in the 60s and 70s, that about the draft and everything that's happening. And if it keeps going like this, there are kids that are sitting on the couches playing video games and working on computers and that sort of thing. They're going to be marching down the courthouse getting a draft card. And that's where we're headed. We're headed back for the same kind of situation if they keep this guy in office in the president's seat.
Billy, I completely agree. Well said. Thank you. Thanks for watching Free Speech. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's check in on Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us, who's on the line with us?
Victoria Jones.
Why, it's Victoria Jones. Hey, Victoria.
Yes.
Finally, we made it. We made it work to our Portland studio.
We made it work. You never know.
There you go.
You know, Thomas Edison, all those things.
Indeed. So tell me what's going on in the world today, Victoria Jones.
Well, one thing that's going on in the world right now as we speak, and I can't tell you a thing about it, is that in the Rose Garden of the White House, and I'm in the basement, so I'm not there, I'm watching it on my computer, President Trump is giving a statement with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell standing next to him. They just had lunch together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did hear the beginning, and we had no idea, by the way, the press corps, everybody was upstairs all ready for the briefing, which time had been changed. Everybody was upstairs. We suddenly got an announcement, press calling us for a media availability, we were told. So everybody trudges out to the Rose Garden, but nobody knew what it was for. So with no idea that this was coming. This was very, very sudden. And so it's very interesting. We knew that the lunch was happening, and we thought that maybe McConnell would give a statement to the press on his way out, but that Trump would make a statement with McConnell standing next to him, and maybe McConnell would speak, I don't know, is fascinating, particularly since the two have been at odds. And Trump opened by saying that Mitch McConnell has been a friend of his for many years, since before he was in politics.
Well, that's interesting.
Yes.
I had no idea. I thought that Trump was mostly hanging out with New York Democrats.
That's what he said.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what else is going on?
Well, President Trump also had a full cabinet meeting this morning, and he had a few things to say at a brief press availability for the pool ahead of it. And I think some of these things are worth mentioning to you. They will be, obviously, in the news.
How many of the cabinet members washed his feet?
I don't know, and I don't know if they had if they had a praise-a-thon either.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know, Tom, and I'm not rising to the bait.
Okay, thank you. I figured.
Okay, so President Trump blasted Obamacare. He said it's dead, it's finished, it's gone. You shouldn't even mention it, he said. It's gone. There is no such thing as Obamacare. Oh, Mitch McConnell's taking the microphone. Okay. I don't know what he's saying. I'm just telling you that's happening. Yeah. There is no such thing as Obamacare anymore. It is and I said this years ago, it's a concept that couldn't have worked. He said that in Obamacare's best days, it couldn't have worked.
So it's now Trump care.
Well, That occurred to me as I was reading the article. I'm not sure that that was the best thing to say, but that's what he said.
Yeah.
He also praised his administration's work on immigration enforcement and border security, saying he's, quote, going to take it 5 steps further. He said his government's led a bottom-up effort on immigration. He singled out Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who he said is doing a wonderful job on the issue. He said he talked about the White House's set of border security demands that, as you know, were largely written by advisor Stephen Miller. He said on DACA, the Dreamers program. And he said that the administration's plan closes dangerous loopholes in the law. He said reform legislation should reduce end chain migration that allows an immigrant to apply to bring in extended family members. He said in favor of a system that puts American workers and the American taxpayer first. He also said Mexico is having a tough time right now in terms of crime. More than ever now, we need the wall. He also said that Republicans and Democrats are working on a short-term fix for health care insurance markets after he last week scrapped subsidies to insurers. But I don't know the details of what he said on that. And he also said that he's weighing recommendations for welfare reform as his government looks for ways to cut costs. He said that some welfare recipients are taking advantage of the system while others are not receiving enough benefits to live.
Is he addressing corporate welfare at all? Or welfare for billionaires?
I don't think that was the area of welfare that he was actually addressing.
Oh, okay. He meant welfare programs for poor people. But
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
All right.
Before I get to the next piece of political news, I want to get this in quickly. Researchers today disclosed a serious security flaw in the encryption standard that protects tens of millions of consumer, business, and government Wi-Fi networks.
I read that this morning.
It's a hole they said could allow hackers to intercept sensitive traffic, tamper with websites, or install malware. And this flaw is affecting the security protocol known as WPA2. And so that's one of the most popular ways of securing Wi-Fi networks.
Right. Is WPA, as opposed to WPA2, also vulnerable? WPA is the older protocol.
The article I have does not mention WPA. It only mentions WPA2.
Interesting.
They say it includes computers, smartphones, interconnected thermostats, TVs, personal assistants, the Internet of Things.
Right.
The researchers said, in general, any data or information that the victim transmits can be decrypted. In some circumstances, hackers can also manipulate data transmitted from a router to a client. Android devices are vulnerable to a, quote, exceptionally devastating variant of the hack, according to the researchers.
Yeah, in fact, one article I read said that over the short term, the only solution to this is to use a virtual private network, a VPN service.
Or a pencil.
Or a pencil. Perfect. Okay.
Legislation introduced by Senator Claire McCaskill, a Democrat of Missouri, top Senate Democrat, would repeal an Obama-era bill that critics say has dramatically restricted the ability of the Drug Enforcement Administration to crack down on opioid distributors suspected of wrongdoing. She's launched an investigation earlier this year into the sales and marketing practices of opioid manufacturers. And she's done this after a joint Washington Post and 60 Minutes investigation.
Victoria Jones. Thank you, Victoria.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Robert Wright's brilliant new book, Why Buddhism is True, The Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment. This is from the first chapter, which is titled Taking the Red Pill. We're on page 3. He's talking about the movie The Matrix. Remember Nemo and all that? I saw The Matrix in 1999, right after it came out, and some months later I learned I had a kind of connection to it. The movie's director, the Wachowski siblings, had given Keanu Reeves 3 books to read in preparation for playing Neo. One of them was a book I had written a few years ago, earlier, The Moral Animal, Evolutionary Psychology and Everyday Life. I'm not sure what kind of link the directors saw between my book and The Matrix, but I know what kind of link I see. Evolutionary psychiatry can be described in various ways, and here's one way I had described it in my book. It is the study of how the human brain was designed by natural selection to mislead us and even enslave us. Don't get me wrong, natural selection has its virtues, and I'd rather be created by it than not be created at all, which, so far as I can tell, are the only 2 options this universe offers. Being a product of evolution is by no means entirely a story of enslavement and delusion. Our evolved brains empower us in many ways, and they often bless us with a basically accurate view of reality. Still, ultimately, natural selection cares about only one thing, or I should say, cares in quotes about only one thing, since natural selection is just a blind process, not a conscious designer. And that one thing is getting genes into the next generation. Genetically based traits that in the past contributed to genetic proliferation have flourished, while traits that haven't have fallen by the wayside. And the traits that have survived this test include mental traits, structures and algorithms that are built into the brain and shape our everyday experience. So if you ask the question, what kinds of perceptions and thoughts and feelings guide us through life every day? The answer at the most basic level is not the kinds of thoughts and feelings and perceptions that give us an accurate picture of reality. No, at the most basic level, the answer is the kinds of thoughts and feelings and perceptions that helped our ancestors get genes into the next generation. Whether those thoughts and feelings and perceptions give us a true view of reality is, strictly speaking, beside the point. As a result, they sometimes don't. Our brains are designed to, among other things, delude us. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Some of my happiest moments have come from delusion, believing, for example, that the tooth fairy would pay me a visit after I lost a tooth. But delusion can also produce bad moments, and I don't just mean moments that, in retrospect, are obviously delusional, like horrible nightmares. I also mean moments that you might not think of as delusional, such as lying awake at night with anxiety, or feeling hopeless, even depressed for days on end, or feeling bursts of hatred toward people, bursts that may actually feel good for a moment but slowly corrode your character, or feeling bursts of hatred toward yourself, or feeling greedy, feeling a compulsion to buy things or eat things or drink things well beyond the point where your well-being is served. Though these feelings, anxiety, despair, hatred, greed, aren't delusional the way a nightmare is delusional, if you examine them closely, you'll see that they have elements of delusion, elements you'd be better off without. And if you think you would be better off, imagine how the whole world would be. After all, feelings like despair and hatred and greed can foster wars and atrocities. So if what I'm saying is true, if these basic sources of human suffering and human cruelty are indeed a large part of in large part the product of delusion, there is value in exposing this delusion to the light. Sounds logical, right? There's a problem that I started to appreciate shortly after I wrote my book on evolutionary psychology. The exact value of exposing a delusion to the light depends on what kind of light you're talking about. Sometimes understanding the ultimate source of your suffering doesn't by itself help very much. Let's take a simple but fundamental example. Eating some junk food, feeling briefly satisfied, and then only minutes later feeling a kind of crash and maybe a hunger for more junk food. This is a good example to start with for two reasons. First, it illustrates how subtle our delusions can be. There's no point in the course of eating a six-pack of small powdered sugar donuts when you're believing that you're the Messiah or that foreign agents are conspiring to assassinate you. And that's true of many sources of delusions that I'll discuss in this book. They're more about illusion, about things not being quite what they seem, than about delusion in the more dramatic sense of the word. Still, by the end of the book, I'll have argued that all of these illusions do add up to a very large-scale warping of reality, a disorientation that is as significant and consequential as out-and-out delusion. The second reason junk food is a good example to start is that it's fundamental to the Buddha's teachings. Okay, it can't be literally fundamental to the Buddha's teachings, because 2,500 years ago when the Buddha taught, junk food as we know it didn't exist. What's fundamental to the Buddha's teachings, though, is the general dynamic of being powerfully drawn to sensory pleasure that winds up fleeting at best. One of the Buddha's main messages was that the pleasures we seek evaporate quickly and leave us thirsting for more. We spend our time looking for the next gratifying thing, the next powdered sugar donut, the next sexual encounter, the next status-enhancing promotion, the next online purchase, but the thrill always fades, and it always leaves us wanting more. The old Rolling Stone lyric, "I can't get no satisfaction," is, according to Buddhism, the human condition. Indeed, the Buddha is famous for asserting that life is pervaded by suffering. Some scholars say that's an incomplete rendering of his message, and that the word translated as suffering, dukkha, could, for some purposes, be translated as unsatisfactoriness. The book is Why Buddhism is True, the Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment. Buddhism is True, the Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment by Robert Wright.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Wanted to talk to you about the Trump effect. How does a country change as a consequence of its leadership? How do families change? Well, actually, change is probably the wrong word because that would require a death or a divorce. But how is the dynamic of a family defined by the parental figures? We have almost all of us, grown up with families and have a sense of this. And there is a well-established reality that we all know just as, intuitively as common sense, but that in the literature of psychology you can find, Sigmund Freud was very much not the first to identify this. Plato talked about this back 3,000 years ago. But in particular that essentially the leadership, the parent figures, the parents, define the culture of the family, and families have cultures. And then people grow up in that culture, and they're affected by it, influenced by it, impacted by it, and it helps them become who they are. In some cases for worse, typically for better, even when the experiences are bad. This is the whole point of resilience: is that you take a bad experience and you turn it into something useful. Or you learn from it, or you grow from it. And yeah, that's possible to do. So we look right now at, there's a couple of metrics here that just totally spooked me, that I think are quite consequential. The Washington Post, Aaron Blake, writing in the Fix column in the Washington Post. This is from Sunday's paper, the 15th. The opening sentence says it. There's a pretty striking finding, Aaron Blake writes, in Thursday's Quinnipiac University poll. Fully 46% of Republicans, a plurality, said that they would support a preemptive strike against North Korea. Now, I have noticed in myself, and I've been attributing this to just all the stress and craziness around moving our principal residence from D.C. to Portland Although we're keeping, we still have our boat in Washington, D.C., and we're going to be going back and doing the show from D.C. a lot, too. But it's been a pretty insane time, particularly with the moving company, basically, holding our stuff hostage for a month and a half now. And I have found myself on a couple of occasions just basically blowing up for what seems like no reason. And, acting like a fool, basically. I mean, just getting angry under circumstances that I would never get angry under. And, one the other night in a restaurant. I mean, it was weird stuff. And I remember looking at myself, at my own behavior, saying, wait a minute, why are you doing this? Why are you behaving like this? This is not your normal, right? I'm a pretty laid-back guy. I'm willing to put up with a lot, shall we say. And I generally take, concern for anything from concerns to abuse as basically, well, okay, maybe I can learn from this. Maybe there's something of value here. But when about half of Americans want war with North Korea, and you have to assume that something fundamentally is wrong. That half of Americans are of Republicans, excuse me. It's not half of Americans. It's half of 26% of Americans. So it'd be 13% of Americans. That half of Republicans either don't understand that North Korea, that Seoul, South Korea is just 20 some odd miles from the demilitarized zone, and there's literally, big guns, right? Mortars, that can take out Seoul. They don't need a nuke to take out Seoul. They can do it right now with conventional weaponry. And they're prepared to, have been for all these years. It's part of their mutually assured destruction. There was also this march in New York City over the weekend. The headline, "Shrinks Take to Streets to Demand Narcissistic Trump's Ouster." And this article by Amy Russo and Mary Kay Lynch, some 125 psychologists and other mental health professionals marched along Lower Broadway Saturday to demand that President Trump be thrown out of office, based on a constitutional clause allowing presidents to be ousted when their cabinets decide they are unable to discharge the powers and duties of their job. This is the 25th Amendment that they're talking about. And I'm just wondering how much of what's going on in America right now, and how much of what we're seeing, I mean, like people being beat up at Charlottesville, right? These white supremacists, picking fights with people. The Vegas shooter. It would be a way over the top stretch to say that the Vegas shooter was motivated by Donald Trump or by the current state of our politics or anything like that. But in the broader sense, it seems like people are starting to pop. People are snapping. Homicides are up. Suicides are up. Not hugely, but they've been going up. And I'm just wondering if we're all experiencing this level of continuous Trump stress. I found myself over the weekend. I caught myself checking my cell phone kind of compulsively, and I just looking at the news sites, right? I just hit the New York Times every now and then, and the Financial Times and Washington Post and whatnot. And I remember asking myself, okay, Tom, why are you doing this? I'm trying to read a book, but I keep flipping over to the news sites. Why? I don't recall having been like this in the past. I would get my news in the morning and the evening, and I would talk about it on the radio. I'd check the news throughout the day, but it wasn't like this kind of compulsive thing. And I find that I've been doing that. In fact, it's been a real challenge for me. I read myself to sleep at night, typically. And so, I read an average of probably a book a week, reading myself to sleep, because it takes me typically about an hour to get myself to sleep reading. And I have been, for the last 5-6 months now, I'll be reading, as I'm trying to go to sleep, and all of a sudden I'll just like, bang, because I read all my books on my cell phone, right? And bang, I'm over there at the New York Times site. And it's like I haven't even realized I've done it. Like this lack of even mindfulness, of mindful awareness. And I've started catching myself doing this and just saying, wait a minute. What happened to your ability to focus on these books, right? Because that's what was putting me to sleep, was the focus on it. Because at a certain point, my brain would just go, I don't want to focus anymore. I'm going to go to sleep. Okay. And I really think it's Trump. It's like when I'm hitting these news sites, what I'm expecting is the latest outrage from Donald Trump. Has he started World War III? Who has he upset now? Who in the world, which government in the world is now laughing at the United States? Which country in the world is now concerned that we're going to attack them, that we're going to pull an Iraq on them? Have we started a war with Iran yet? Has the entire Middle East melted down yet? What crazy thing has Trump done now? And this new Quinnipiac poll that half of Republicans, 46% of Republicans, want Trump to attack North Korea right now with the first strike. They want World War III. It's like, what is going on? Are we all being made crazy? Or at least the Republican Party? By Trump? Or what if it's not Trump? What if it's like, right-wing hate radio and Fox so-called news? But something's going on. It seems to me that the zeitgeist has changed.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Zeitgeist being that fancy German word for the spirit of the times, right? The feeling that we all have. What is America? Seems to have changed. And welcome back. Chris in Imperial Beach, California, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I want to disagree with you again, which I rarely never do.
Chris, your real name is Michael. I know that.
Correct, Michael.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I want to disagree with you again, which I rarely do because I respect you so much. About Julio, I believe you should stop using the term Reaganomics, because it wasn't Reagan. It was, who had an attempted assassination attempt after his inauguration. Reaganomics was initiated by his cabinet and his vice president. So when you look at this buffoon in the White House now and his cabinet, do you see an absolute parallel to Reagan's time?
Yeah, I do, actually. Reagan put a bunch of corporatists in his cabinet. He put a bunch of, I guess it's what you would expect if you're going to have a Republican president, appointing his cabinet, because the Republican Party and the conservative movement, for that matter, have ceased to represent conservative values, basically since the 1980s, and now they only represent the interests, not even the values of, but the interests of the top 1% and the top 1% of corporations in America.
I agree. And again, like you said before, Reagan basically in the last 2 years of his term showed signs of dementia. So if Trumpster is showing signs of dementia, we get Mike Pence, who wants to abortion, no gays, no lesbians, whatever. I mean, what is the answer, Tom?
Right. Michael, we're just going to have to sort that out. We're living through this very bizarre period, and I don't think that there is a simple answer. I think there have been so many cracks smashed into the glass here of American government and American society by these so-called conservatives over the past 35 years, that in many ways our country is almost unrecognizable. And frankly, I think the something that we need to do about that is to get active inside the Democratic Party and take our politics back. Michael, thanks for the call. Sharon in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Well, just a quick aside. I'm seeing more depression in people, including myself, from Trump. Mm-hmm. Not so much the popping off.
Yeah.
But I went through a period where I actually called in and I was in a really horrible state, and I'm better now. But my concern is I just finished reading Naomi Klein's No Is Not Enough.
Right.
And I read her shock doctrine years ago, and so this was bringing back a lot of that to mind and stuff, and thinking about Puerto Rico, and me being concerned all along that they're ripe for a shock doctrine.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been saying also since the beginning, as a lot of people have been saying, is turn it into a solar showcase. Well, I understand, and I don't know enough about it to be sure, but apparently Elon Musk has talked about doing solar and stuff down there.
Yes, he has.
I don't know much about Elon Musk. Somebody told me he's not a jerk. But I just see companies, whether him or someone else, or him in concert with somebody else, going in and pulling a shock doctrine. I don't know enough about this guy.
Yeah. I don't know Elon Musk personally, but I have a friend who knows him and thinks well of him, very well of him. I think that Elon Musk is not trying to do shock doctrine. I think he's trying to do proof of concept. But we'll see. Time will tell. Sharon, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
On April 15th, 1949, Pacifica Radio KPFA 94.1.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
So, talking about my own what I think might be my own response to the Trump presidency. And again, I'm not sure. I mean, it's always a challenge to psychoanalyze yourself, and very often. We don't understand our behaviors or our motivations until it's in retrospect. In some cases, years, have to pass before we can look back on our own behaviors and really have a dispassionate understanding of them. But it seemed to me that I have been affected by the Trump presidency in a way that I'm not happy about or proud of. Although, as I said, it could just have to do with all the craziness around moving and everything else. And it's not some huge systemic thing, and it's not like I've turned into a jerk, but we all have those moments, right? And I'm just noticing that I'm having those moments more frequently than I used to. And actually I haven't since I had this insight. This was like a week or so ago. I just got it. There's something going on. And some people, depression is up. There was a piece in the New York Times last week, and I was going to print it out and go through it at some length on the air, but it turned out it was like a 29-page article in the New York Times Magazine about how young people, principally adolescents, kids, in their teens, are experiencing depression at record rates. Now, just like with ADHD in the 90s, you don't know if it's that there's an increase in actual depression or if there's an increase in diagnoses and medications for depression. Because, when ADHD came along and the drug companies started pushing Ritalin, all of a sudden lots and lots of people were getting diagnosed. And, in some, particularly in upscale communities, kids saw this as, the way to get an edge on their competitors, the other kids that compete with them for these college slots and whatnot. And, hey, Ritalin is going to give you that competitive edge and you're going to make it through and all that.
But my suspicion is that there actually is an increase in depression. And there's an increase in anxiety among young people. Now, when I was growing up, the existential threat that we all were living with was nuclear winter. Nuclear war was that the Soviet Union and the United States might get into a nuclear war, and that nuclear war could end all life on Earth. Not literally all life, but all life that we would consider consequential, all large, complex life. And so, you know, there was a certain amount. I remember duck and cover. You know, I was 6 years old in 1957. And I remember diving under my desk in the elementary school, you know, when the bell goes off and the siren goes off, and they taught us how to, you know, you cover your eyes with your four fingers, and you cover your ears with your thumbs, and you put your head now, you know, between your knees and curl up and kiss your butt goodbye, I guess. You know, this was, you know, the wounding, as it were, I think, for an entire generation. But it wasn't as crazed, it wasn't as pervasive, it wasn't as insane, it seems, as what we have right now, where we're looking at the possibility of World War III being tripped off with Iran, World War III being tripped off with North Korea, World War III being tripped off with, you know, who knows what all, right? And you look back at World War I, and I think that we're in a time right now that is closer to, in terms of international relations and the possibility of war, closer to what triggered World War I, which was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo. I think we're closer to that kind of a scenario than we are to a World War II kind of scenario, where another country just goes crazy and starts, you know, aggressively gobbling up all of their neighbors. If anything, the country that has been going crazy and attacking other countries has been us, and under the Bush administration, illegally attacking Iraq and inappropriately attacking Afghanistan, and now still occupying both these countries 14, 15 years later. So we had this situation back then, but now it's you know, with Trump in the White House. So how is this influencing you? What does it mean to you that we have this strange fellow, shall we say, as president, and equally strange, but in other ways, fellow as vice president? You know, Mike Pence with Mother. I mean, you know, Mike Pence, who Trump says, you know, Pence wants to hang gay people. It's like there's just this extraordinary weirdness in the White House. How is this affecting America? What is this doing to us? What can we learn from this, and how can we turn this into something positive? Because I truly believe all negative experiences can be positive experiences if we understand them correctly. And I realize there's some, you know, really terrible things happen, but hey, you see people who've made it through life in the face of great adversity, you know, being blinded, being crippled, being you know, born harmed. We can make it through this. Anyhow, we'll discuss the zeitgeist, the new America under Trump, with you after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your calls after the break. It's 28 minutes past.
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from a book written by my old friend, Dennis Weaver. He has passed away. I wrote the foreword to this book, just FYI. It's called All the World's a Stage, and it's Dennis's autobiography. Dennis Weaver, Chester and Gunsmoke, you know, all that kind of stuff. He's talking about early in the Depression. This is from page 17. It's just kind of telling his early life. Early in the Depression, it became clear that people had to... He's talking about the 1930s, right? When he was a young boy. Early in the Depression, it became clear that people had to come together and support each other, or many would just not survive. not being cooperative and neighborly was not an option. If our neighbors were in trouble, we would not think twice about helping them. We just did it. I remember a family named Hardy bought the 10 acres next to our farm. There was nothing on that land except woods. The men in the surrounding area got together on weekends to cut down the trees and made logs to build a house, a real log raising. Within 6 or 7 weekends, they built a log home for the Hardy family to live in and a shed for their cows. Children had lots of fun. We played games and jumped from stump to stump like leaping frogs while the men sawed logs and hammered nails. Ladies brought covered dishes of food like potato salad, baked beans, and Jell-O, and we had a picnic at lunchtime. It was a community thing, a gathering of friends, and to this day, I still carry the feeling with me. In those times and moments, despite the depression, we thought we had the best of life, and in a way we really did. Life was simpler. We knew how good it felt to be neighborly, to share our lives with each other. The national economy was shredded due to the crash of 1929, but in our area, including parts of Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas, the problem was exacerbated by what was known as the Great Dust Bowl. Continuing droughts had dried up the earth, and the fierce winds picked up the defenseless soil and made huge clouds of thick, swirling dust. Visibility often shrunk to a few yards. Most skilled and determined farmers were humbled before its wrath. The nutritious topsoil was all blown away, and agriculture came to a screeching halt. At the time, I didn't understand it, but it's crystal clear to me now that our economy and our environment are interdependent. When the environment at that time was destroyed and the farmers could no longer farm, they weren't the only ones who suffered. The economic disaster for the farmers spread like a raging virus to carpenters, plumbers, shop owners, and even bankers. Okies by the thousand piled whatever possessions they could salvage into cars, trucks, any jalopy that would run, and headed for California, which Dust Bowl victims considered to be the land of milk and honey. Perhaps the only one who profited from the Dust Bowl was John Steinbeck when he wrote The Grapes of Wrath. Because of the Dust Bowl, our farm was not financially successful. It certainly helped to feed the family, but the extra income my folks had hoped it would generate did not materialize. Mom, always trying to find a way out, heard from neighbors who had fled the Dust Bowl and our devastated economy earlier that the strawberry picking was good in Oregon. There was money to be made just for the picking. So we gave up on the farm and moved back to my birthplace in Joplin, 619 Brownell, to get ready for the trek west. Furthest west I'd ever been was Blackwell, Oklahoma. Would I see a real live cowboy? I wondered. What would Oregon be like? I might even see the Pacific Ocean. Our budget for the trip was minimal at best. Like the pioneers who crossed the Great Plains 100 years earlier, we were obliged to carry our own supplies because motels and restaurants were out of the question. Unlike those earlier settlers, the horses that carried us were not hitched to a wagon, but were under the hood of a 1928 DeSoto. Our plan was simple. Mom, Howard, Mary Ann, 2 years old by this time, Jerry, Denzel, Bell, and I would go to Oregon and pick strawberries and do what other jobs we could get. We would save our earnings and come back to Joplin in time for Howard and me to go back to school. Dad would stay behind, keep his job at the Empire District, and serve as a safety net for us. In case we broke down or got stranded, he could bail us out. Denzel was a carpenter by trade. He put his skills to good use. He built a cupboard on the back of Old Betsy, our DeSoto, where we could store an ample supply of canned goods and food staples. By releasing a fastener, the backside of the cupboard opened up and a leg swung down to support it, and lo and behold, we had a table on which to prepare the food and off of which we could eat. We jammed the storeroom with supplies, gave Old Betsy a final mechanical check, said our farewells, and headed west for the wild blue yonder. Although she never hinted at it, I'm sure Mom must have had a few qualms and trepidations. For me, it was just the beginning of what I imagined to be a great adventure. We started out for Oregon in the late spring of 1934. In those days, there were no 4-lane interstates, just 2-lane roads that were often in need of repair and full of detours. Our top speed was 40 miles an hour, so driving to Oregon was no walk in the park. Not long after crossing into Colorado from Kansas, we could see on the horizon what looked like a triangular cloud. It was strange because, like the other clouds moved, this one didn't budge. We used it as a guiding star for more than 2 hours before we realized it wasn't a cloud at all. It was the snow-capped top of Pikes Peak. As we drove deeper and deeper into the Rocky Mountains, I was moved more and more by their sheer beauty and breathtaking grandeur. It was awesome. I loved the majestic granite mountains, the tall pines, the quaking aspens, the crisp, dry air. It was all very magical to me. I guess I'm back in Colorado today because I was so impressed with it as a child. I was not only impressed by the beauty, but by what it had to offer. This was the first time I'd ever seen a real live working cowboy, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a real deer. We were driving over Wolf Creek Pass at dusk, coming around a bend, and there, right in front of us, was this wild deer running down the road in and out of the shadows. The book, All the World's a Stage, Dennis Weaver's autobiography. The foreword by Thom Hartmann.
We're talking about President Trump stress disorder, PTSD, and how it's affecting people. And, I mentioned my own experience that I felt that I was more hair trigger in my anger response than I've been at any point that I recall in my life, frankly. And, maybe it's just getting old and curmudgeonly, but it's just really been going on since Trump escalated to the White House. And at least that I've noticed. And I'm looking at the Twitter feed here. Chester says the 60s bomb sirens used to scare the bejesus out of me. Imagine my kids now. My God, what do you tell them? Here, Gloria says, Tom, I'm in a state of constant fight or flight, causes anxiety, etc. I've been cursing at public meetings and on social media for the first time in my life. Jeff says our collective consciousness is under enormous stress since the election of Trump. Rhonda says, you aren't alone in feeling an unrest, so many of us are. Jamie O'Brien tweeted, Tom, you're right, my gastroenterologist says she's seeing more ulcers and my cardiologist is seeing more high blood pressure. And Nate and Sean and Troy were just reminding me that, we had a psychologist on this program just a month or so ago who, on the air, said that everybody she knows in the psychology, psychiatry profession and psychotherapy professions, they're getting slammed. And some of her physician friends, they're getting slammed by people who are saying, I want drugs. I need sleeping pills. I need anti-anxiety pills. I need, all this kind of stuff. So anyway, it's our topic. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Bill, your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, hi. Tom, it wasn't actually about that, but it was about Trump. I just wanted to point out what a serious double entendre the phrase, not my president is, because I think when most people hear it, they assume they're saying, hey, I don't recognize legitimacy. I don't recognize, this guy's position and authority. But I was thinking about it the other day, and I'm flipping it around. I'm watching this guy, and I'm watching his decisions and his executive orders, and the people he's appointed to his cabinet, who almost universally are dedicated to profitizing and or destroying this country's infrastructure. So when I'm looking at him, and then every time he references the Democratic Party, it's like they don't exist. So, Tom, in the truest sense of the word, in terms of job performance, Trump is not my president. He doesn't represent me. He doesn't care about me. He doesn't. His interests are special interests, and of course, the greatest special interest is Donald Trump. So, anytime you hear someone say that, think about it both ways. Is he our president? Not figuratively, literally. Is he?
In other words, literally, he is the president.
Is he our president?
He is the president of the top 1% and of a few hundred major transnational corporations, and of the KKK, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
That's my point.
Yeah, that's his constituency. Interesting point. Bill, thank you for the call. Antoinette in Alameda, California. Hey, Antoinette, what's up?
Well, I just wanted to first comment on what you're talking about as far as all the, the stress and everything. And as a black person, I see these microaggressions all the time. And the thing is to call out, liars when they do speak, like this guy Michael who just called, who said that, Reagan had dementia and was being manipulated by people with all these taxes and economics. I remember the Republican primary when Bush Sr. called out Reagan doing voodoo economics.
That's right.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yep.
So, the thing is to call out liars when they're liars and knowing we can't quit. But the main reason why I called, Tom, is because I love you and I would love to get a book, so I came up with something good that a conservative did, and I hope it meets your measure. Bush Jr., he gave money for AIDS, HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria for Africa, And
You're
it was a game changer. And even though 20% of it had to go to his ABCs, abstinence, be faithful, and condoms, it still made a difference in Africa. So I'm hoping that counts as something that a conservative Republican has done, and you will send me a signed book.
Antoinette, I'll do it. I will. And you're right. And this is something that Ellen Ratner constantly reminds me of because, it was Ellen who took me to South Sudan. Ellen has, who built this charity, Goes for the Old Goat, in South Sudan, in the middle of a war zone, right on the border with Darfur, to help people out. And every time I would speak ill of George W. Bush, she would say, but George W. Bush saved probably 1 million lives in Africa by supporting AIDS, anti-AIDS programs. Now, my understanding, Antoinette, is that most of those programs that were put into place by George W. Bush have either expired or been repealed since then. But I'm not well versed enough to know if that's the case or not. My challenge used to be, please, and I should have said it this way because maybe you would have won. I'm not sure, but I will send you a book. But it used to be, please name one piece of legislation sponsored by Republicans and passed by a majority of Republicans whose principal beneficiary was average Americans rather than the top 1% or big corporations. And again, what you have identified, I think, might be that one exception to the rule, and there may even be pieces to that. So, Antoinette, I'm going to put you on hold, and Antoinette is on line 6. So if somebody can pick that up and get her information, we will get her a book. Carla in Greenville, North Carolina. Hey, Carla, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. You are spot on today, and I promise this is going to fit together. I'm 63. My dad went to school on the GI Bill that you mentioned earlier. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the GI Bill. He was raised dirt poor. When he was 7 years old, he painted houses after work for $1 a day to support his mother. And when he was able to go to East Carolina Teachers College and meet my mother, he became the vice president of a college. He sent every maid we had to college, got them incredible jobs, got with wonderful benefits, and so that they could retire and they could raise their children better. And I mean, you were talking earlier about being raised by people in certain situations, and that's how I was raised. And now my literal anger at Donald Trump, someone who doesn't give a rat's ass about anybody, it blows my mind. And I'm like you. I'm finding myself being extremely angry because that's not how I was raised in this country. And and Antoinette rocks, by the way. Antoinette, you're wonderful. And I'm just at a point where I don't know how to control my anger any longer. Yeah. Every day. And I'm like you. I read myself to sleep at night, but I'll find myself on the Times reading everything that and I get so darn angry.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how someone can be in charge of this country and have no feelings towards people at all and what they're going through.
Well, he's got, we talk about, in NLP, they talk about dysfunctional decision-making strategies, or dysfunctional strategies for getting through life successfully. It appears to me that Donald Trump has a very, very dysfunctional negotiating strategy, and it's basically, I win, you lose, or, you win, I lose, whatever, but he only views the world in terms of winners and losers. And this does not seem to me like a positive or useful thing. So yeah, I'm with you. And Carla, your example of your father going through, getting the GI Bill, and then being able to produce a well-educated, successful family. It's exactly the experience that I had as a kid, and many of my friends did, and my wife did. Her father not only he came back from World War II. He did the GI Bill. He went through law school at Michigan State University, and ended up the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Michigan. I mean, never would have happened without the GI Bill.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, this is, an entire generation.
And that's what I feel like we've lost in this country. We need to get that back.
Oh, yeah.
You reach down and you help somebody up. I've been on the bottom. I've been on the top pulling people up, and I've had people pull me up. I mean, that's what we were founded on. That's how I was raised, and I miss that. And you're right. And like Antoinette said, the high blood pressure, the anger, Donald Trump has really, really, really just done some horrible things to people in this country.
Yeah.
It's very difficult.
Now that's the downside of it, Carla. But the upside of it, I'm wondering if for example, the Harvey Weinstein revelations. I'm wondering if those kinds of investigations would have even happened if we hadn't had that Access Hollywood moment.
Exactly. And I tell my kids that all the time. I'm like, yep. I said, look, I don't know how anyone who's a woman or a Christian could have voted for this man, but they did because of their hatred for Obama, which is really bizarre. Yeah. But the thing to me is, yes, it brought it to light, and now this whole Weinstein thing is brought to light, and I don't know about other women, but I know I certainly went through it over and over growing up, and I'm so happy to see these women step forward and talk about this. It's about time.
Yeah,
and you're right. Had the whole Access Hollywood thing not happened, I don't know if it would have or not.
Or it might just be a little story limited to Hollywood. Who knows? Because I think, frankly, the whole Weinstein thing is meta to the whole Trump thing. Weinstein has been accused of things that Trump has basically bragged about doing. He's an admitted, whatever you'd call it, sexual predator, I guess, and a convicted con man. Carla, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's about 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Welcome back. And see here with this old call screen software, it's a little hard to see things. Melissa in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Melissa, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hi. So many topics touched on here. When I first turned on the TV, it was what happened? How did we get here? Education. That's my answer. And the thing is, because we didn't have civics class in my generation, and I'll be talking to baby boomers, and they don't realize that we haven't had that education. They think we're just a bunch of lazy, stupid kids.
Literally going. I remember in third or fourth grade. It's one of my earlier memories. I remember memorizing the preamble to the Constitution and the Gettysburg Address, and that was a big deal. That as fourth graders we could do that, and along with the Pledge of Allegiance. Those were the things that we had to memorize in fourth grade civics class. We learned about the three branches of government. We learned about the history of the Electoral College, although we didn't learn the racist history of it. But we learned that stuff. You're telling me literally, Melissa, you never studied that stuff in elementary, middle, or high school?
Nope, not at all.
Wow.
In high school, I had American history and world history, and there's no way you could get all of that information in one class.
Right. This is, Richard Dreyfuss is on a one-man crusade right now to bring civics back to education. He's Richard Dreyfuss. I was going to say, I think his website is richarddreyfuss.us, but I could be wrong. But whatever his website is, he's got a whole website about it. But he's just all over this, and that's such a shame. It is such a shame. Melissa, thanks for the call.
That's why a lot of people call you Professor Tom. I honestly really didn't know much about politics until Air America.
Yeah. Well, thank my third or fourth grade teacher.
Can I comment about the Trump PTSD?
Yeah. President Trump, PTS, stress disorder. Yes, President
Yeah,
Trump's
because I've been basically depressed ever since Bernie lost, and I used to get most of my information from Facebook, and now when I log on there, Mark Pocan, he's my congressman, and, he'll have his ever positive posts on Facebook, and as soon as I click like on something, down drops these comments, and there's all these conservative trolls. They're just like, lies, what about the federal deficit? Which had absolutely nothing to do with whatever he posted.
Yeah. Yeah, you wonder to what extent.
Angry and wanting to respond to that and blowing up and.
Yeah. Well, you wonder where all this is coming from. I mean, my operating theory has been that much of the quote Russia stuff has been Russian trolls hired by Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn, because Manafort was running the campaign, and he knows. I mean, it's just like General Electric outsources their back office work, their bookkeeping to India, because bookkeepers in India will work for $10,000 a year, and here they require 40. So it's like, is this the same thing? Are there troll farms out there that have been outsourced? I'm suspecting there are, Melissa. I've seen the same thing. Melissa, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And apparently Richard Dreyfuss's website, thedreyfusinitiative.org, is the website, because he's working to bring civics education to the United States. Michael in Bronx, excuse me, Michael, what's up? Michael, listening to Sirius XM?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I do. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
All right. I wish I was on the line with you when you had that character Julio on, because I was debating him. He said a statement which really had me outraged and befits to your question about what's happening to this nation since Trump got into the picture. And he says, I quote, that why should I have to pay for somebody's sex change? Because I find it offensive. I'm against it. It's my First Amendment right, sort of thing.
Right.
Number one, let's remember one thing. What people go into hospitals for, or whatever surgery or whatever procedure is, that's none of your business, Julio, if you're still listening. That's why we have HIPAA laws. That's why we have right to privacy in terms of medical issues. And that's why Roe v. Wade is very important to women. It's not just about abortions. And you want to talk about First Amendment rights? Well, first, let me back up about taxpaying dollars. So you're okay with Mike Pence pulling a stunt at an NFL game at taxpayers' dollars, close to $250,000, and which was on his own personal leisure time, which is against the law. That's what got Rudy Giuliani busted. That's what got Mark Sanford busted, fellow Republicans, by the way. And the thing is that he used taxpaying dollars just to pull a stunt of protesting against the protesters. And speaking of protesting, you want to talk about First Amendment. So Colin Kaepernick and all these other people taking a knee at the national anthem, raising awareness of the inequities and injustices going on, and pretty much initiated by Trump and Pence and the Large Front, but a history of injustices. We're not supposed to speak up about it. Is that what they're saying? Every time we try to speak up about it,
that's definitely what they're saying.
Try to find a way to shut us down, and I'm sick of it.
Yeah, that's definitely what they're saying, Michael, is the subtext of Trump's rage about NFL players, about specifically black NFL players taking the knee, is the subtext of that is, how dare those people of color, how dare they have an opinion. They're supposed to be just workers. They're just supposed to show up and play football for all of us. And you know, they're just not entitled to their opinion.
Disrespecting the flag, disrespecting the meaning of the flag, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
If anything, the person disrespecting the meaning of the flag is Donald Trump, because this flag was birthed in protest. The First Amendment guarantees our right to peaceably assemble and petition our government for redress of grievances. That right to protest is written into the First Amendment. It is a patriotic thing to do. Michael, thank you for the call. Very, very well said. Dwight in Antonio, Georgia. Hey, Dwight, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Thom Hartmann?
That's me.
Yes, how you doing?
I'm well. How are you, Dwight?
Long-time caller. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, thank you. What's on your mind?
I'm sitting here with the Constitution and the preamble, and my problem is I have that the Democratic Party have no heroes. They've turned their back on FDR, and they refuse to look at Martin Luther King. There was a reason why FDR was a 4-time president. He brought the framework of government into the activity of the American population, where government can do good for the people.
Yep.
And Martin Luther King brought Christian values to bolster what the things FDR was doing. Now, both these guys were two different generations. They didn't live together. And most of your listeners are all talking about programs that FDR had put together. And the current Democratic Party will not win until they start embracing FDR and stop using the narratives of these conservatives. Because every president up to Ronald Reagan were FDR presidents. And the country has gone down the tubes since conservatism and the Reagan has taken over. So until Democrats can go around and tell the American people that we need to go back to FDR, to bring back government, to have strength within the economy, and that Martin Luther King and social justice are the bedrock and the basis for these government policies, Democrats will never be able to communicate or inspire voters to come out and vote for Democrats. And that's why I'm sitting here with the preamble of the Constitution. And whenever FDR had problems with conservatives, he would bring out the preamble. He would say that we, the people of the United States, in order to provide a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic equality, provide the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty up to ourselves and our prosperity, to ordain and establish the Constitution. And that is the reason why Democrats have a problem. They don't go back to the Constitution, and they don't use FDR as their model or Martin Luther King.
Well, I would say, I don't disagree with you, Dwight, but I would add that there are increasing numbers of Democrats who are anchoring their perspectives, their philosophies, their worldview, and their politics in Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society, too, which was Medicare, Medicaid. The Great Society did some very, very consequent, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, things like that. So FDR and LBJ, the Great Society and the New Deal, those two things, which Steve Bannon, bragging about, we're going to deconstruct the administrative state, we're going to take apart America, we're going to undo, what America is right now. It's such a tragedy. Dwight, thanks so much. You said it so very, very well. Thank you all for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us showing up, participating, being part of it all. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon, evening, whatever it may be. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.